Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. One of the strongest, most uncontrollable, and most unpredictable emotions with the potential for real destruction is teenage love. A teen's first conscious experience of emotional and passionate feelings is brought on by hormonal changes and changes in how they interact with others. Everyone, however, perceives and feels this sensitive sensation differently. Young individuals frequently take risks in an attempt to impress their significant other and gain their attention, favor, and adoration, because this is an age of rebellion, self-discovery, and the desire for self-affirmation. The bucolic and serene Georgian village of Lawrenceville was the scene of a string of incredibly violent crimes in the spring of 2017. 2 persons lost their lives as a result of these acts, while 4 more were put in grave danger. For financial gain, an elderly couple was tormented and beaten to death. Law enforcement's quick action helped put an end to the violent rampage, preventing the young criminals from finishing what they had begun. 2 pupils were seriously hurt but amazingly survived. Because the lovers intended to die together, the press likened the story of these young offenders, Cassandra Bjorg, 17, and Johnny Ryder, 19, to the story of Romeo and Juliet. But they liked to think of themselves as Bonnie and Clyde. The most horrifying thing, despite their ignorance of the fabled criminal duo's past, was that they specifically targeted members of their own families in an attempt to get rid of everyone they cared about. In late January 2017, Cassandra Bjorg and Johnny Ryder met in the company of mutual acquaintances and fell in love at first sight. At the time, Johnny had just turned 19 and had already been married and divorced. He was not prepared for family life, and the marriage was a forced arrangement because his underage fiancée had gotten pregnant, while Cassandra was 17 and still enrolled in school. But the pregnancy ended too soon, and within 6 months, their partnership was over. Johnny was enthralled by Cassandra and fell deeply in love with her at first sight. Despite her small stature and good looks, Cassandra was a fierce, unbridled energy ball. She took Taekwondo, Wushu, and Korean martial arts like Tang Soo Do very seriously. Bjorg had even competed several times, but she eventually stopped training, saying that emotional upheaval had caused her to lose her focus. In actuality, the schoolgirl's bad habits that were incompatible with athletics and her preference for partying with friends were the primary causes. The girl was attractive and had a trim build. She was good at drawing attention to herself and manipulating people, particularly the boys who were in love with her. Many now question if she really loved Johnny, or if she only exploited him to further her evil. The boy, on the other hand, was obviously smitten with her and would stop at nothing to win her over. He felt he had discovered his soulmate and true love. While his new girlfriend resided with her grandparents, who loved their only granddaughter, Ryder lived with his mother and 2 sisters in his parents' home. The young couple fell in love almost immediately after meeting, and they rushed to show their significant others to their family members to show how serious they were about their plans. But their loved ones disapproved of their decisions, which infuriated them and put them in grave peril. In this criminal case, too many circumstances came together to create a terrible tragedy, even though it is likely that this couple would never have committed a severe crime on their own, much less deprived their family members of their lives. Johnny revealed that Cassandra was the source of horrific ideas that her partner was prepared to carry out without hesitation, while his girlfriend was susceptible to manipulation and influence due to her addiction to illegal substances. What information is available about Cassandra Bjorg? On January 19, 2000, Cassandra Bjorg was born in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, which is in Gwinnett County. She was born out of wedlock to Amanda Sterling, who had her as her sole child. Cassandra never interacted with her real father and never knew him. Cassandra had behavioral and aggressive problems from an early age, since her mother was more concerned with her personal life than with rearing her daughter. Cassandra's mother married Stephen when she was 15 years old. Her stepfather started making attempts toward his young stepdaughter and displaying abnormal interest in her. As a habitual liar who was always getting into trouble, Cassandra tried to inform her mother about this, but she did not believe her and assumed that her daughter was making it up. The teenager then complained about the situation to her grandparents, Wendy and Randall, over the phone. The elderly couple felt it would be better for their lone grandchild to live with them, after becoming very worried about the situation. The 15-year-old girl so relocated to her grandparents' large 2-story home in Lawrenceville in October 2015. She had her own room there, and her grandparents rarely denied her anything, giving her all she needed. Cassandra deftly used Wendy and Randall's generosity, who thought that their love and attention would help their granddaughter recover. She ran away from home frequently, stopped playing sports, missed school, and hooked out with the wrong crowd. She also began taking money from her family members and using it to buy illegal drugs and alcohol. She once threatened to kill her grandma after she was unable to obtain the quantity she required. The Borgia family phoned the police over 30 times between October 2015 and March 2017 due to Cassandra's uncontrollable behavior, which included frequent runs, unexplained disappearances, fights, theft, and aggressive behavior while under the influence of drugs. After Cassandra started dating Johnny Ryder, her conduct became unmanageable. Wendy and Randall were adamantly opposed to her bringing her boyfriend to her grandparents' house and telling them he would now live with them. When Johnny attempted to invite Cassandra to live with him at his family's house, a similar circumstance happened. The pair was expelled due to opposition from his mother and sisters. The couple quickly came to the conclusion that anyone who obstructed their relationship ought to be removed. They intended to see Cassandra's mother and stepfather to make amends, take all of their savings, deal with Cassandra's grandparents, get rid of Johnny's family, seize their money, and then run away to Florida to spend as much money as they could from the 3 residences. The harsh treatment of the grandparents. Cassandra was aware of the precise location of her grandparents' home where a sizable quantity of money was kept. Cassandra didn't know the password to the little safe that was kept in a closet in one of the second-floor rooms. The explanation is that Wendy and Randall started hiding the money after they saw it was missing and realized their cherished grandchild was stealing. Randall, Wendy's husband, had just turned 64, and Wendy herself was 63. After more than 40 years of marriage, they had a daughter, bought their ideal house, and intended to spend their golden years on the second floor. They occupied 2 bedrooms that were next to each other and had separate bathrooms. Because they thought their granddaughter could be rehabilitated and didn't want to ruin her life, the old couple didn't want to send her back to her mother or place her in juvenile detention, despite their inability to handle her. Cassandra allowed Johnny to enter the residence with kitchen knives and baseball bats on the evening of April 2, 2017, after the elderly couple had already gone to bed. The pair made their way to the second level via the stairs. While Johnny went to Randall and began striking him with the bat, Cassandra went into her grandmother's room where she was sleeping and stood beside her bed. It took the old man a while to comprehend what was going on. He was scared, confused, and helpless to protect himself. Johnny leaped onto the bed, stood on top of his victim, and kept striking him. Wendy, meantime, awoke to the commotion, hearing slow thuds and what sounded like a garbled cry in the shadows. She recognized the figure by her bed as her granddaughter. She was stabbed in the shoulder as soon as she attempted to stand up. Deep slashes on the woman's hands showed that she attempted self-defense, but the forces were not equal. In the adjacent room where Johnny was mistreating her grandfather, Cassandra pulled her grandma by the hair, demanding the code to the safe and threatening to kill them if they didn't comply. The young couple bound the elderly couple with tape and kept beating them. The elderly couple prayed their granddaughter wouldn't dare to take away the lives of her closest relatives, even though Johnny was holding a knife to Randall's throat. But when Cassandra Command's boyfriend began stabbing Randall in the stomach a minute later, Wendy screamed, pleading with them to stop, and revealed the code to the safe. In order to open the safe, Cassandra hurried to her grandmother's room right away. Then, with a victorious yell and a few fat envelopes of cash, she ran back to show her accomplice that they had succeeded. But the old couple's agony didn't stop there. In an attempt to obtain the bank card credentials so they could steal more money, Cassandra and her boyfriend persisted in beating them. It's possible that Wendy and Randall began saying farewell and declaring their love for one another after realizing they wouldn't be left alive. Later, when she was being questioned, Cassandra recalled this, and it made her laugh a lot. Once they had all the information they needed, the young monsters pulled Wendy into the toilet after killing Randall with a knife to the neck in front of his wife. They were still dealing with her. Her own granddaughter killed her by striking her head with a baseball bat. Cassandra once bemoaned to Johnny that Wendy would not pass away and would still be alive. Then, to make sure the woman had no chance of surviving, Johnny cut her throat. Cut party on the bones. Their granddaughter and her companion remained in the house, while the 2 bodies rotted in the second-floor rooms, following the cruel treatment of the elderly couple. The young pair used the pilfered funds to purchase anything they want, including alcohol and any illegal drugs they could find. They admitted during questioning that they wanted to try everything and that they could now afford to do so. A few days later, Wendy's sister called the police to ask for a welfare check on her relatives, who hadn't spoken to her since April 1st. Wendy's bad vision made it unusual for her to simply send texts rather than answer the phone. The texts requested not to worry and said that everything was okay. However, this just made matters worse. To make sure everything was okay, law enforcement dispatched a patrol officer to the specified house, but nobody answered the door. Nothing looked strange at first. Neighbors noticed the couple's vehicle heading downtown, but there were no indications of a break-in or that the mail had been picked up. The officer came to the conclusion in the morning that the elderly couple had left the residence without a warrant to search it while out on errands. After stating that he had completed his work and found nothing odd, he departed. In the meantime, the juvenile offenders went shopping in the victim's vehicle. They ordered meal delivery and purchased food and drink every day, but they were unable to consume all of the food they purchased, so the rotten and uneaten goods were left to fester in boxes on the floor, tables, windowsills, and every other surface in the house. They took money out of Wendy's bank card as the money started to run low, but they were unable to locate Randall's wallet using his cards. Cassandra and Johnny invited their friends to a party at their residence, approximately a week after the crime against her grandparents. They had a major issue, though, because the remains on the second story had decayed considerably and were giving off an odor that was hard to ignore. After discovering 2 cans of construction sealant in the garage, Johnny made the decision to seal the doors of the rooms containing the remains, but first they had to cover up the stench. They covered the bodies with several liters of chlorine bleach that they purchased from a hardware shop. After that, Johnny meticulously caulked all the cracks around the bathroom door and the bedroom door. The couple informed their pals over the phone that Cassandra had a lot of money after her grandparents left town for a few days, and that she intended to have a large party with wine and more entertaining activities. But their buddies found the story highly dubious. The majority of them were aware of the several occasions Wendy and Randall had called the police due to their inability to manage their granddaughter. As a result, nobody dared to go to this peculiar gathering. Only a tiny bad company of problematic youths, including those who could obtain illegal substances and consented to do so in exchange for a reward, eventually assembled at the house. The guests complained about the awful stench, even while they were drunk, and Cassandra attributed it to a clogged sewer. It became intolerable for the criminals to remain in the residence, so the following day they decided it was time to depart. But they needed additional money for their getaway, because they were running low on cash and had almost used all the card's balance. The strategy to obtain it had been simmering for some time and now had to be put into action. However, more of their family members would have had to die for this. On Friday, April 7, 2017, the family was saved by an unintentional victim. The pair infiltrated the Ryder household. Johnny had keys, so it was home. They got there in the morning when Johnny's sisters and mother were at the university working. They found enough cash and goods to sustain them for a while once they were able to raid the house. The criminals purchased bear spray, a considerably larger and more potent aerosol that resembles pepper spray, and armed themselves with baseball bats. This unique spray, which is intended to deter hostile bears, contains potent tearing and irritating chemicals that burn skin and mucous membranes chemically, causing acute coughing and excruciating agony in humans. This weapon has the potential to be lethal. They planned to attack and kill each member of the family one at a time, then take the loot and flee with it. They knew roughly when each member would arrive home. Assuming the mother and sisters had left for the weekend, no one would be searching for them by Monday, giving the criminals a few days' advantage. After her university lessons, Melissa, Johnny's younger sister, was the first to return home. However, she was accompanied by her boyfriend, whom she had asked over so they could have some alone time together. The thieves chose to follow their strategy and add another victim to their blacklist, despite the complexity of the situation. Melissa and her boyfriend realized there had been intruders, probably burglars, when they came in and saw the mess. Melissa rushed to the phone right away to call the police, but she was unable to do so. And bitter orange haze filled the room, causing their skin to feel like it was on fire, their throats to burn, and their eyes to water. Abruptly, 2 bat-wielding figures with scarfed faces emerged and started beating the pupils. The victims, however, surprisingly put up a strong fight. Unaware of the bear spray's potency, The attackers started strangling themselves during the ensuing altercation. The homeowner, Johnny's mother, who had come home from work earlier than normal, appeared as the front door opened abruptly. While the criminals were able to flee through the kitchen door, she shouted and dialed 911. Johnny took extra keys to his mother's car during the robbery, and they used them to escape, leaving behind the primary piece of evidence, a car registered to the late Randall, while Cassandra dropped the car keys they had brought with them during the attack. Although the crooks wanted to murder the additional witness right away, the couple didn't expect Melissa to return home with her boyfriend because it was difficult to attack and kill two strong young people at once. Luckily, they were unable to finish their plot. They obviously miscalculated the might of House of Horrors, their weapon of choice, and overestimated their own talents. Although both attack victims lived, they were admitted to the hospital with various levels of wounds and chemical burns. The abandoned vehicle in the backyard, which did not belong to the Ryder family, piqued the interest of the responding law enforcement authorities. They identified the legitimate owner of the vehicle by looking through the registration plates. It soon became apparent that the car's owner had phoned the police earlier that week, but no one had come to the door. Officers went straight to Randall and Wendy's house, and this time, after failing to receive a response, they pried open the door and went inside. They were instantly struck by the smell of rotting, which was obviously coming from one of the bedrooms upstairs. The floor and bed were stained with blood, and the closet was open, exposing an empty safe. The door had been sealed with construction adhesive, making it hard to enter the other bedroom, and taking time and effort to pry it open. The decomposing body of an elderly guy with his hands bound behind his back and obvious marks of extreme torture was on the floor when the cops eventually made their way inside. Additionally, the bathroom door was sealed, making it more difficult to break in. The homeowner's wife's remains were discovered. She had clearly been beaten and tormented before having her neck cut, which is how she died. Empty beer bottles littered the house. The sink was piled high with filthy dishes, and there were garbage boxes and containers of ruined takeout food all over the place. She became the main suspect in this case because police had been to the residence dozens of times over the previous year and a half and knew that the murdered couple had a granddaughter who often ran away, acted aggressively, and got into trouble. However, dangerous guests, where can I locate the youngster who is accused of such a horrible crime? Upon learning of what had transpired at the Borgi residence, the injured Ryder's relatives instantly implicated Cassandra, claiming that Johnny might be her accomplice because he was enamored with her and might follow her example. The automobile in which the young robbers and offenders fled was also listed as wanted. In order to wash away the bear spray residue and ease the excruciating burning, the couple went to a store after leaving the site and purchased 5 liters of milk. Johnny reflected for a moment and thought of Jason, his best buddy from high school, with whom he had been inseparable in their senior year, but had nearly lost touch. The criminals made the decision to temporarily seek refuge and assistance at Jason's house after graduating. When his old classmate showed up at his flat with a girl, Jason was taken aback. Although the two appeared menacing, Johnny asserted that they were in danger and had no other options. Johnny claims that he and his mother got into a heated disagreement about his girlfriend, whom she didn't like. According to rumors, his mother sprayed them both with pepper spray and threw him out. The unexpected visitors requested to clean up and take a shower. In addition to providing clean clothes, meals, and the opportunity to spend the night, Jason and his mother were incredibly generous and let the couple use their restroom. Since they had nowhere else to go, the two accepted the offer. The apartment's owner made coffee and breakfast for everyone in the morning. She engaged the guests in friendly conversation and inquired if she could be of any further assistance. Outside, the sound of police sirens suddenly became more audible. A minute later, cops used a megaphone to call out to Johnny and Cassandra by name and urge them to surrender as police cars pulled up just beneath the windows. This change in circumstances surprised Jason and his mother. After thanking their host for their kindness and directing them to vacate the flat, Johnny grabbed a big kitchen knife. The crooks shut themselves inside, and the hosts, instantly frightened, hurried to the escape. They decided it would be better to die together, and they had no plans to give up. The crooks realized that a SWAT team would arrive at any moment, and that they couldn't hide in someone else's apartment for very long after failing Romeo and Juliet. With a knife in hand, they proceeded to the restroom and, in the hopes that the wounds would bleed out rapidly, made multiple deep cuts on their wrists. Already losing consciousness, Johnny pulled out his phone and left his mother a voicemail pleading for her forgiveness. He apologized for what he had done. He claimed that he shouldn't have harmed his family because he loved them so much. He went on to say that this was his last message and that he was passing away in the arms of his cherished girlfriend. But no one received any such texts from Cassandra. The young couple was lying on the tiled floor in one another's arms, surrounded by a massive pool of blood, when the cops broke into the apartment and pried open the bathroom door. Despite being unconscious, they both displayed signs of life. After receiving emergency medical care, they were taken to the hospital. Shocking admissions made by the juvenile offenders. The young couple inquired about one another as soon as they were conscious again. The first person to confess was Johnny, who said he felt bad about what he had done. His girlfriend, meanwhile, made an effort to appear helpless and blamed her partner for everything. She stated that she was extremely furious with herself, had been depressed for years, and no longer wanted to live. But as she described what had happened, she unintentionally revealed that she had long wished for her grandparents to die. Cassandra acted like a child during the interrogation, making expressions, complaining about the unappetizing hospital food, and even flirting with the police. It was only after a restaurant gave her quick food, which she had asked, that she began to speak. Even the most experienced officers were taken aback by what the teenager disclosed. Cassandra gently responded that her grandparents had lived long enough when asked why she took their life. She went on to say that they forced her to attend school, ruined her fun, and concealed money that she needed. Cassandra was simply angry because she couldn't locate her grandfather's bank card and didn't express regret for robbing the few people who loved her of their life. Grandpa was always damn smart, she said, laughing when he informed her that he had hidden his wallet beneath his pillow because he was afraid she would steal it. The teenage criminals also acknowledged that they planned to kill the Ryder family as payback for their rejection of Cassandra and their attempts to keep Johnny from seeing her because they believed she was a negative influence. Because they believe that deceased people don't require money, they also intend to loot the family. They then want to pay a visit to Cassandra's mother and stepfather in order to exact revenge on them for their mistreatment of her. This couple planned to spend their money and enjoy life by the sea in Florida. The couple reconnected in the courtroom a few months after the abortive attempt on their lives. They constantly argued, criticized one another, and even used slurs, giving the impression that there was no longer any love or passion between them. Both ultimately entered guilty pleas to the robbery, the assault on the students, and the offenses against the elderly couple. Both Johnny Ryder and Cassandra Bjorgi were given 2 life sentences, with the possibility of parole after the court found them guilty on all counts. Cassandra said she had nothing to repent for, but after 60 years, Johnny showed sincere regret and apologized to everyone he had harmed. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Christine Rossum was born on October 25, 1975, in Tennessee, USA, but grew up in California and Virginia because her father's job required them to relocate frequently. Christine had 2 siblings, and in her early teens, she attended an all-girls boarding school where she began to engage in behaviors such as drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. Christine had started using methamphetamine when she was 17 years old in 1992. In 1994, she enrolled in a university, hoping to break free from illegal substance use. However, following a relapse, she dropped out and moved to San Diego. Her life changed in 1995. When she met Gregory DeVillers, she appeared to have overcome her problems with illegal substances and was on her way to starting a family. Kristen married Gregory in 1999 after graduating with honors from San Diego State University in 1998. She became a toxicologist and worked for the city's medical examiner's office. Despite initial difficulties, it appeared that Kristen had successfully turned her life around and was on a positive path. However, not all endings are happy. Christine Rossum, a 25-year-old woman, made a distress call to 911 at 9:22 p.m. on November 6, 2000, a Monday, from her home in San Diego, California, located in the United States. In her call, She reported that her 26-year-old husband, Gregory de Villiers, was not breathing and allegedly committed suicide. The emergency dispatcher instructed Kristen to perform CPR, but despite her efforts and the arrival of paramedics and police, Gregory was declared dead. Christine and Gregory had only been married for about 17 months. According to Kristen's statement to the police that evening, Gregory appeared drowsy, which he attributed to the effects of cold medication. Christine went on to say that she took a bath and came out to find Gregory lying on the bed, not breathing. Gregory was found on the bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered rose petals, which puzzled the police. A wedding photo was near his pillow, and Kristen's crumpled diary pages were strewn across the floor. Christine claimed she had moved Gregory to the floor in order to perform CPR. The police compared the situation to a scene from the film American Beauty because of its peculiarities. When the paramedics first arrived, Christine informed them that her husband, Gregory, had not used drugs. However, she later changed her statement, stating that he may have consumed oxycodone. When they arrived at the hospital, Christine told a nurse she suspected Gregory had overdosed on oxycodone. The police investigated the possibility that Gregory's death was caused by an accidental overdose of cold medicines and oxycodone. In their conversations with Christine, they discovered that Gregory was distressed, indicating that their marriage appeared to be on the rocks. This led Christine to initially suggest to the police that he had committed suicide, and as an additional avenue of investigation, the scattered rose petals surrounding Gregory's body were remnants from a bouquet he had given her for her birthday on October 25. She believed that the use of these petals represented the end of their marriage, with one surviving rose serving as the source. Gregory's family, as well as others on the night his body was discovered, questioned the idea of suicide. On November 8, one of Kristen's co-workers, Russ Lowe, contacted the police, marking a significant turning point in the investigation. He revealed Kristen was having an extramarital affair with her manager, altering the course of the police investigation. Gregory and I met in 1995 and got married in 1999. Kristen, who had previously struggled with methamphetamine abuse, changed her life with Gregory's help and graduated with honors in biochemistry. In March 2000, she was hired as a toxic ecologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office. Meanwhile, Gregory pursued a career in biotechnology. Kristen began working at the OME. Michael Robertson, an Australian citizen, took over as forensic laboratory manager, succeeding Russ Lowe. Russ, who'd been serving as the acting laboratory manager, had been with the OME for a long time. The decision to appoint Michael to the permanent position rather than Russ created tension in the laboratory. The atmosphere became even more strained when it was revealed to employees that Kristen and Michael, both married, were having an extramarital affair. In October 2000, some employees expressed concern about the possibility of Kristen receiving preferential treatment. Kristen resumed her methamphetamine use a few months after the revelations. Police investigations revealed that on November 2, 2000, just 4 days before Gregory was discovered dead, he confronted Kristen about her use of prohibited substances and his suspicions about her affair. Gregory insisted on her resignation from the OME, threatening to reveal her use of prohibited substances and the affair to her employer if she refused. Following Gregory's death, an autopsy was performed, which included toxicology tests. The medical examiner, Dr. Blackburn, determined that Gregory died of acute fentanyl intoxication. The toxicology results showed that Gregory's autopsy specimens contained extremely high levels of fentanyl, as well as smaller amounts of clonazepam and trace amounts of oxycodone. When asked about the source of the fentanyl, Christine claimed ignorance. However, the police were aware that Christine had access to fentanyl as a toxicologist. The police speculated that Kristen may have secretly administered the fentanyl to Gregory, resulting in his poisoning. They developed a case based on medical and toxicological evidence. Kristen was charged with first-degree murder and pleaded not guilty. During the trial, Kristen's parents, Ralph Rossum and Claremont McKenna, mortgaged their home to secure her $1.25 million bail. However, their financial commitment prevented them from affording a private attorney. As a result, the court appointed a public defender to represent Kristen, and the prosecution claimed that Kristen murdered Gregory because he threatened to expose her use of illegal substances and affair with Michael Robertson to her employer. The prosecution claims Kristen poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a potent synthetic opiate that is 80 times stronger than morphine. They speculated that she may have initially tried to harm him with clonazepam. But when that failed, she turned to fentanyl. The prosecution also claimed that Christine staged the bedroom suicide by tearing pages from her diary and strategically placing petals and a wedding photo around Gregory's body. The court learned that Kristen, who has a degree in biochemistry, allegedly used her knowledge of prohibited substances and chemistry to carry out the poisoning. The prosecution claimed Christine attempted to persuade her colleagues at the medical examiner's office, where she worked, that Gregory's death was a suicide. However, due to a conflict of interest, the case was transferred to another laboratory to conduct the toxicology tests, as the medical examiner's office is normally responsible for determining the cause of death in unusual cases. The prosecution described Kristen's activities on November 6 to the jury. She informed Gregory's employer of his absence and then went to work. Her co-workers reported that she was seen crying in Michael's office about an hour after arriving at work around 9 a.m. The apartment complex manager where Christine and Gregory lived testified that she returned to her apartment at 12:10 p.m. He was seen rushing inside. Later, at 12:41 p.m., she went to a local grocery store and purchased a few items. In the hours leading up to Gregory's death, she called Michael several times. Rose petals were discovered around Gregory's body, which Kristen attributed to the lone surviving rose from the bouquet he gave her for her birthday. However, the police revealed the receipt, which showed Kristen purchased a single rose on the same day Gregory died. The court learned about Gregory's death and the elevated fentanyl levels found in the tested sample. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the medical examiner for San Diego County, who performed Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been dead for at least an hour before paramedics arrived. Dr. Blackburn told the court that Gregory had early bronchopneumonia, which occurs when normal breathing processes fail to eliminate accumulated secretions in the lungs due to unconsciousness or shallow breathing. Furthermore, Dr. Blackburn revealed that Gregory's bladder contained a large amount of urine. If Gregory had been conscious, he would have found this condition uncomfortable. As a result, Dr. Blackburn concluded that Gregory's breathing had been inadequate for 6 to 12 hours prior to his death. During his testimony, Dr. Blackburn clarified that the amount of clonazepam discovered in Gregory's blood did not constitute an overdose and was deemed non-fatal by medical standards. The court was told that the presence of fentanyl, particularly at such high levels, was uncommon, and the medical examiner's office rarely includes it in routine tests. However, due to a conflict of interest, the samples were sent to Pacific Toxicology, which performed fentanyl-specific tests. I support the prosecution. Dr. Theodore Stanley gave testimony. Dr. Stanley explained that fentanyl is a powerful and fast-acting pain reliever, emphasizing a serious side effect: the potential for respiratory failure, which causes a person to stop breathing. Dr. Stanley testified that the rate at which fentanyl takes effect is dependent on how it is administered. The peak effect occurs about 16 hours after applying a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral consumption, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and 5 minutes after intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley informed the court that fentanyl is typically not administered orally because the liver destroys approximately 65 of it, leaving only 35 in the bloodstream. However, when asked how fentanyl entered Gregory's body, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could provide a definitive answer. Dr. Stanley proposed that the Gregory system's varying concentration levels, combined with evidence of him being unconscious and breathing shallowly for an extended period of time prior to his death, indicated that fentanyl may have been administered to him multiple times. The prosecution, while unable to provide a definitive explanation for how Kristen poisoned Gregory, suggested that she may have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he slept. The court was informed that following Gregory's death and the discovery of fentanyl use, the Office of the Medical Examiner performed an audit of its impounded drugs and drug standards. This audit discovered the disappearance of 15 fentanyl patches and 10 milligrams of fentanyl standard. Furthermore, the audit revealed that Kristen had logged into the fentanyl standard and was involved in all 3 cases where the missing fentanyl patches were impounded. The Office of the Medical Examiner also discovered unaccounted for quantities of methamphetamine, clonazepam, and Oxycontin, a time-released form of oxycodone. The defense argued that Kristen was innocent. They admitted that fentanyl was the cause of Gregory's death. However, the defense claimed that he committed suicide due to depression caused by his marital problems. During the trial, Kristen testified for herself. She told the court that when she awoke on November 6, Gregory appeared disoriented. At 7:42 a.m., she notified his employer of his illness and absence from work. Kristen stated that she went to work and then returned home to check on Gregory. They ate lunch together after midday. According to Kristen's testimony, she inquired about Gregory's previous condition, and he admitted to taking some of her oxycodone and clonazepam. After lunch, he went back to bed, and she went back to work, leaving at 2:30 p.m. She returned to the apartment, met with Michael, and then returned around 5 p.m. She left again at 6:30 p.m. for errands. Kristen claimed she returned at 8 p.m. I took a bath. Kristen testified that she entered the bath believing Gregory was asleep, only to discover he was not breathing when she got out. At that point, she dialed 911. During cross-examination, the prosecutor characterized Kristen's account as bizarre. She admitted to previous lies, including those about her use of prohibited substances. The prosecutor emphasized that fentanyl, which is difficult to detect, was an ideal poison. Kristen, who was exposed to such substances through her work, was well aware of them. Despite Dr. Blackboard's testimony that the clonus levels in Gregory's blood were not fatal, the defense contended that the combination of oxycodone and clonazepam could have a synergistic effect, increasing their potency. However, this explanation did not answer the question of how fentanyl was consumed or why such high levels were found. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Kristen of first-degree murder and murder under special circumstances due to the use of poison. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Kristen appealed her conviction. During the appeals court proceedings, it was revealed that her own defense team had made errors. Her lawyers admitted that, while they acknowledged fentanyl as the cause of death, they did not request testing for fentanyl metabolites in the autopsy samples. This test could have determined whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or if the presence of fentanyl in the samples was due to laboratory contamination after his death. If the fentanyl had only been found in the samples and not in Gregory's body, the prosecution's claim that fentanyl caused his death would have been false. The question is, how can fentanyl be present only in the samples? Is there a risk of laboratory contamination if the medical examiner's office sends the samples to a different lab for testing? The appeals court discovered that there was a break in the chain of evidence involving the samples. The appeals court discovered that the samples designated as specimens extracted from Gregory's body were stored in an unsealed cardboard box. The intended procedure was for immediate transportation to the sheriff's office, followed by transfer to an external laboratory. However, because the designated recipient was not available at the sheriff's office, the box containing the samples was kept in the medical examiner's office instead. Approximately 36 hours later, it was transported to the sheriff's crime lab. The central argument presented to the appeals court was that during this time period, when the samples were stored in the OMA, anyone with a key to the building could potentially access them. This raised the possibility that fentanyl had been added to the samples posthumously, casting doubt on the theory that fentanyl caused Gregory's death. Kristen contended that there was a motive to contaminate the samples and frame her for murder, citing personal relationships and tensions among OMI employees. Kristen cited an incident on November 8, 2000, in which Michael, one of the individuals connected to the OMI, allegedly told a toxicologist at the OMI that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. Kristen's trial lawyers made a mistake by failing to challenge the prosecution's claim that her husband died of a fentanyl overdose, according to a 3-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeal. They claimed that her legal team should have tested the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites rather than accepting the prosecution's story. However, they did not overturn the conviction, but instead returned the case to federal court for a hearing to determine whether the defense error could have changed the trial outcome. Nonetheless, following a subsequent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court emphasizing federal court deference to state court decisions in such matters, the appeals court panel declined to order the hearing in Kristen's case. As a result, her appeal was denied, and she remains in prison. Michael Robertson, who was identified as a co-conspirator during Kristin's trial, returned to Australia and founded a forensics consulting firm. Share your opinion with us in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Perhaps the most vulnerable time in a person's life is during their adolescence. It's a period of time when people are neither children nor fully grown adults. Even though they are still innocent and carefree, they frequently keep secrets, sometimes out of embarrassment or fear. Tragic events can occasionally result from an inability to communicate those difficulties to a loved one or trusted parent. Florida has been rocked by the case of Justice Garrett, whose life was tragically cut short in 2018 at the age of 16. Her mother's realization that she had failed to recognize or comprehend the nightmare her daughter had been living through was heartbreaking. Justice's story revolves around a horrible secret she kept out of fear of being judged, which ultimately resulted in an unthinkable tragedy that took her life. Born on March 19, 2002, Justice Mary Garrett was the oldest of two daughters born to Danielle and Sebastian Garrett. She grew up with Jeanette, her younger sister, who was 10 years her junior. The majority of Justice's early years and adolescence were spent in the tiny Florida town of New Smyrna Beach, which is situated in Volusia County. The sisters remained with their mother after Justice's parents divorced in 2016. After meeting Robert Kern approximately a year later, Danielle quickly started dating him. By the fall of 2017, Danielle and her two daughters had relocated to Robert's house in the little rural town of Sorrento, Florida, which has a population of just over 1,000. Justice had the most trouble adjusting to the new surroundings and the relocation. She missed her close friends who were still in New Smyrna Beach to start. Second, she had to change schools in the middle of the school year while she was a high school student. Third, she disliked both her mother's partner and her new home. Despite her frustrations, Justice acted politely and made an effort to avoid causing trouble. Justice made friends at her new school right away because of her outgoing, gregarious, and humorous personality. A classmate named Rochelle became particularly close to her, and the two were essentially inseparable. The girls even listed each other as sisters on social media, and Justice often stayed over at Rochelle's house. Justice missed the school bus on Friday, April 13, 2018, because he slept in too late. She didn't have time for breakfast that day because she was rushing to get ready for class. Her mother intended to take Jeanette to the hospital, but her younger sister stayed at home because she was feeling ill. Since school was just a few stops away, Justice chose to ride the public bus there. After packing her backpack and bidding her mother farewell, she departed from the house. Justice was last seen alive at that point. Danielle wasn't worried when Justice didn't arrive home from school on time. She figured her daughter, who frequently went to Rochelle's house after class, had done so. By nightfall, Danielle assumed Justice had made the decision to spend the night at her friend's house, as she had been doing often. She wasn't immediately alarmed by the fact that Justice's phone was off. On Saturday morning, though, Rochelle called Danielle and anxiously inquired as to Justice's well-being. With a shiver running down her spine, Danielle questioned in a shaky voice whether Justice hadn't spent the night at Rochelle's house. She was shocked by the answer. Since Thursday, Rochelle disclosed, she had not seen Justice. Justice's phone had been off for almost 2 days, and she hadn't arrived at school on Friday. Danielle went into a panic. She hurried to the local police station and reported her daughter missing after multiple unsuccessful attempts to get in touch with her. The hunt for Justice started right away. Officers initially thought Justice might have returned to her hometown for a weekend visit with friends, after learning that she had only been in the area 6 months prior. Authorities believed she would reappear soon, because teenagers of that age frequently leave home on their own initiative, whether in protest or for other reasons. Danielle, however, was adamant that her daughter would never do anything like that without telling her. Finding out Justice's social circle and whether she had a boyfriend, had been in a recent argument, or had any other information that could help piece together what happened the day she was last seen was the first step. All of Justice's possessions were still at home, and she had not taken any cash. Shortly after she left for school, her phone stopped working. She hadn't returned any calls or messages, and her social media accounts hadn't been active since late Thursday night. She hadn't gotten in touch with anyone, so none of her friends knew where she might be. Justice didn't experiment with illegal substances or drink alcohol, according to her close friends and family. She had never engaged in serious romantic commitments and was not in a relationship. Justice had never broken the law, had no enemies, and had no conflicts with other people. Her peers viewed her as sweet, kind, and compassionate, and her teachers at school gave her positive reviews. Police promptly reviewed all local traffic accidents, incidents, and crime reports in the region. One possibility they entertained was that she had been in an accident and was unable to speak. She was not, however, listed as having participated in any such incidents. Investigators were able to follow her movements on the morning of her disappearance by using information from her phone. Justice left her house at 7:30 a.m. and started to walk in the direction of the school. After about 15 minutes, she started acting strangely. After a brief pause, she made a sudden direction change. Her phone was switched off shortly after. The small, sleepy town was filled with rumors and conjecture after Justice vanished. Any incident became the focus of attention in a community where nothing ever happened. It was quickly spread by gossip and frequently embellished with lies. Some residents found amusement in spreading rumors, and they saw no harm in doing so. Many of Justice's classmates and friends sincerely wanted to assist with the investigation, but others saw it as a chance to attract attention, increase their own significance, or even experience a brief moment of fame. A number of people reported seeing Justice Garrett in various locations around town. According to some, she entered an enigmatic black vehicle with tinted windows. Some speculated that she had been recruited into a religious sect, while others suggested she was out on the street with a group of teenagers who didn't fit in. Investigators found it challenging to distinguish fact from fiction because these rumors appeared out of nowhere. Consequently, all information, no matter how unlikely, had to be carefully verified. A girl who was one grade up from Justice stood out for her actions. She claimed that the teenager had fled with a secret boyfriend and was expecting his child, and she created a whole blog devoted to Justice's disappearance. By spreading sensationalized and completely made-up stories, the girl was merely trying to gain popularity and attention at school. She was temporarily suspended from school while the investigation was underway as a result of her actions, which resulted in disciplinary actions. Her social media accounts were also deleted for disseminating misleading information. 4 days after Justice vanished, on April 17, a man called the police with a terrifying message. He claimed to have discovered something unsettling in a forested area outside of DeLand. An enthusiastic runner, the man frequently jogged along a remote path that wound through a park and into the woods. As he made his way farther into the woods that morning, he detected a potent, disagreeable stench of decay. He initially believed it to be a dead animal's carcass and considered reporting it to the proper authorities so that it could be taken out. But his curiosity overcame him, and he made the decision to look into the odor's origin on his own. The runner left the trail and ventured into the brush for roughly 15 feet. He saw a horrifying scene there, a severely decomposed human body that was completely deformed. It looked like a young woman, judging by the long hair and traces of clothing. To make sure he didn't unintentionally disturb any possible evidence, the man waited on the trail and called the police right away. Officers thoroughly examined the scene and the remains after they arrived. It became evident that a violent crime had been committed here, and the victim was, in fact, a very young woman. The fact that her clothes were ripped and her underwear was gone suggests that the crime was probably violent and intimate in nature. The legs bore obvious bite marks, probably from untamed animals, but a corrosive chemical had done the most serious damage. The girl's face had been eroded to the bone by this substance, which had also been poured over her intimate areas, lower abdomen and chest. It was evident that the offender had tried to remove any traces of DNA in addition to disfiguring the victim, a strategy that, as it turned out, worked. Investigators suspected right away that the girl who had vanished days earlier was the owner of the body discovered in the woods. However, DNA testing was necessary for confirmation because of the extensive chemical damage and decomposition. Sadly, the worst fears of the Garrett family came true. Justice had been discovered dead. About 30 minutes' drive from the town where she resided, her remains were found. Her nose, cheekbone, and several ribs were broken, which was evidence that she had been severely beaten prior to the crime. The precise cause of death was assumed to be mechanical asphyxiation due to the advanced state of decomposition which made it impossible to determine with certainty. During his police interview, the man who found the remains gave important information. "I often ran along the same trail every other day," he explained. He had seen a suspicious-looking man come out of the woods close to the location where Justice's remains were later discovered 2 days prior to discovering the body. Since the witness had only seen the man for a brief moment from behind and a considerable distance away, he was unable to give a detailed description of him. According to his description, the person was a short, stocky white man wearing jeans and a black hoodie. When the man realized he was not alone, he hurried out of sight and vanished behind the trees. The runner didn't give the encounter much thought at the time, but he thought it was strange. That day there was no discernible smell of decay, and he pushed the encounter from his thoughts. But 2 days later, when he found the remains, he remembered the odd man on the trail and told the police about it. Detectives suspected the stranger in the woods might be the criminal who committed the crime right away. He might have gone back to hide his tracks and obliterate the evidence. Experts concluded that chlorine bleach was the corrosive agent used on the body. The remains became unidentifiable due to the rapid decomposition caused by the chemical and the humid climate of the area. However, after passing a polygraph and offering a strong alibi for the day Justice vanished, the jogger was excluded as a suspect. Justice's mother claims that her daughter had intended to ride the public bus to school that morning, but according to street cam surveillance footage, Justice never went to the bus stop. The mystery was further complicated when a neighbor claimed to have seen Justice get into her stepfather Robert's vehicle. Detectives now had to question the teen's parents again to find out why they hadn't told the truth, which fundamentally altered the course of the investigation. Danielle confessed right away, stating that Robert Kern, her partner, had recently had his driver's license temporarily revoked, but he agreed to give her a ride because her daughter was running late that morning. In order to keep Robert from getting upset, Danielle had kept this information from him. She thought Justice was still alive and would soon be going home at the time of the first interview. To confirm the stepfather's account, detectives immediately asked for footage from security cameras close to the school. But according to the recordings, Robert had not dropped Justice off at school or any other location. There were no cameras on his car on the way to the school. Where had they gone then? It was evident from this new information that Robert was probably the last person to see Justice alive. Robert acknowledged driving Justice that morning in spite of having his license suspended when he was questioned again. He claimed that Justice had pleaded with him to take her to DeLand, a nearby town, rather than to school, where she was allegedly scheduled to meet with a covert boyfriend. Robert said he had originally refused to take her there because he didn't know the name of the person she was meeting, but in an attempt to mend their tense relationship, he finally acceded to her requests. He allegedly promised Justice that he would not tell her mother about this outing. She told him that she would come back alone later in the day and that since it was Friday, she would spend the night at a friend's house. Robert concurred because he saw nothing out of the ordinary or worrisome about the circumstances. A potential secret boyfriend was added to the case as a result of this discovery. Investigators had to find him and identify him quickly. He might have been the last person to see Justice alive, or he might have been involved in her disappearance. Law enforcement chose to look through Justice's contacts and social media activity as the first step in the search. Detectives confiscated her laptop because her phone had not been found, and what they found led to further inquiries. Justice regularly engaged with her online and real-life friends through her numerous accounts on different social media sites, but there was no sign of a boyfriend or romantic conversations. However, one account caught our attention as being especially odd and dubious. Investigators soon turned their attention to this profile in an attempt to identify its owner and any possible link to Justice's disappearance. In recent months, Justice Garrett had been the object of unusual interest from a young man named Kevin. He liked her posts, commented on her pictures, and messaged her every day. But Justice didn't appear to care. She didn't want to stay in touch, hardly ever responded to him, and frequently ignored his messages. Later, Justice's friends confirmed that she had spoken of a devoted fan who messaged her on social media all the time, but she didn't find him flattering. Instead, she found him annoying. According to his profile, Kevin lived in the same town as Justice and seemed to be 2 years older. Only a few pictures of a young athletic man were included on his page, but Justice's family and friends had never laid eyes on him. The photos had been stolen from the internet, and the account was soon found to be fraudulent. Experts swiftly gained access to the account and tracked down the information that led to its creation. The inquiry showed that the account was linked to an adult man, Robert Kern, Justice's stepfather, rather than an adolescent. Robert was summoned back for interrogation. Investigators questioned him about why he hadn't told them sooner and why he had made a phony account to communicate with his stepdaughter. Although he seemed taken aback that investigators had discovered his involvement with the account, Robert soon collected himself and provided an explanation. He claimed that he had created the account to help Justice feel better about herself because she was the new girl in town and at school and might value the praise from a young man who seemed attractive. As was previously mentioned, Justice was new to the area, but she had already assimilated into her school community and made a lot of friends. But her behavior had changed recently, according to those close to her. The formerly upbeat and carefree teen had grown more tense and anxious. She frequently stayed over at her best friend Rochelle's house, but she kept the reasons for this change a secret. Though she never told Rochelle what was bothering her, Justice spent so much time there that it seemed like she had moved in. Rochelle claimed that Justice's stepfather had visited her home multiple times to collect her and take her home. Every time, Justice would attempt to avoid going with him and appeared clearly anxious. She would call her mom and beg to stay at Rochelle's for a couple more nights, pledging to finish all of her chores and concentrate on her studies in return. Danielle frequently complied with these demands. It was well known among her friends that Robert and Justice had a tense relationship from the beginning. But Justice never charged him with being aggressive or acting inappropriately. Additionally, nobody in her immediate vicinity, including her mother, had ever noticed anything that appeared inappropriate in Robert's interactions with his stepdaughter. Robert Kern emerged as the sole suspect in the investigation into Justice's untimely death as suspicions about him grew. Police investigated his background and way of life while holding him for additional interrogation. Robert, 43, had a lengthy criminal record that included convictions for physical altercations, possession of illegal substances, and burglary. It had been almost impossible for him to find steady work because of his criminal record. He took on odd jobs to make ends meet and occasionally worked illegally as a carpenter at a nearby sawmill. Now, investigators were trying to piece together Robert's dubious past, his actions toward Justice, and the circumstances leading up to the horrifying crime. Danielle was unaware that she was living with a man who had a criminal past because Robert had taken great care to hide it from everyone around him. She was shocked and eventually spoke up when investigators told her the truth about him. Despite Justice's protests, Danielle acknowledged that Robert had offered to drive her to school that day. Danielle became concerned when Justice failed to come home, but Robert reassured her that Justice was staying overnight at her friend Rochelle's house. He even prohibited her from contacting Rochelle or the police. After looking through Robert's devices, investigators found that Justice had been regularly looking up information about drugs that could make someone unconscious or immobile online in the months before his disappearance. Additionally, he had investigated buying such drugs on the dark web, and it seemed he had been successful. That wasn't all, though. Additionally, Robert had investigated methods of removing DNA from a body, concentrating on common household chemicals like bleach and disinfectants. He had even looked at satellite images of the wooded areas in the area, especially the DeLand outskirts, where Justice's body was eventually discovered. It became evident that Robert had spent months carefully preparing to commit his crime, dispose of the body, and remove any evidence. From the start, his motivation appeared to be clear. Robert had become unnecessarily fixated on Justice and understood that using force was the only way to fulfill his perverted impulses. He had made the decision to eradicate her completely in order to escape legal repercussions for his actions. When investigators examined the geolocation data from Robert's phone that day, they were able to eliminate any remaining doubts regarding his involvement. Together with Justice, he had driven away from their house toward her school before turning suddenly and coming to a stop in a remote location. Robert most likely turned off Justice's phone at this point and rendered her unconscious with a chemical, most likely chloroform. But he neglected to turn off his own gadget, which later recorded his movements. After being tracked toward DeLand, Robert's car came to a halt for about an hour. He would have had enough time during this period to attack Justice, cause her physical harm, strangle her to death, and conceal her body in the woods. In order to destroy any possible evidence, he poured a tiny bottle of a chlorine-based substance over her face and other parts of her body that day. But Robert started to worry that he might have left traces. He brought a big container of bleach back to the scene 2 days later. In a last effort to eliminate any last traces of Justice's involvement in the crime, he then liberally doused Justice's head, chest, and lower body with the chemical. The jogger later found Justice's body and reported it to the police after spotting the attacker when he returned to the crime scene for the second time that morning. Kern's alibi, meanwhile, was soon discredited. Unofficially working at a nearby sawmill, he had asked 2 co-workers to attest that he was on time that day, despite being almost 2 hours late. After being cautioned that they might be charged with perjury and hiding evidence of a violent crime, both witnesses eventually confessed to the truth when pressed further. Despite Robert Kern's denial of all charges, the case proceeded to trial due to the overwhelming evidence against him. According to witness testimony, Justice spent the final months of her life avoiding her home as much as possible because she was constantly afraid. But she never talked to anyone about her worries, not even her mother. Danielle never asked Kern about his past because she was too enamored with her new partner to notice what was going on around her. Kern's claims were methodically refuted by prosecutors, who demonstrated that he had carefully planned this horrible deed with the express purpose of ensuring Justice wouldn't live. Kern was further connected to the crime scene when particles found on his car mats were matched to moss and soil samples from the location where Justice's body was found. However, the corrosive chemical Kern used had eaten away at the victim's remains down to the bone, destroying all DNA evidence and tissue samples, making it impossible to prove the claims of an intimate assault. Nearly 2.5 years after the crime, in August 2022, Kern was found guilty of premeditated violent murder. He will never be freed because he was given a life sentence without the chance of parole. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Donna Ellen Brown was born November 10, 1963, in Florida. Donna was the eldest of 3 girls. She was attractive, intelligent, and successful in her job as an operating room technician. She met nuclear engineer Mark Winger, and the two married in a traditional Jewish ceremony in 1989. Donna and Mark appear to be the perfect couple. They were successful and had a nice house in a nice neighborhood. However, not every story ends perfectly from the start. On Tuesday, August 29, 1995, at 4:27 p.m., Mark Winger called 911 to report that a man was harming his wife, Mark, who lived in Springfield, Illinois. His 31-year-old wife, Donna Winger, called the dispatcher to report that he had shot the man. When the cops arrived, Donna was in critical condition after being hit in the head with a hammer 7 times. A 27-year-old man named Roger Harrington was found beside Donna in critical condition, having sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Both victims were immediately transported to the hospital, where Roger died shortly after arrival and Darla died a few minutes later without regaining consciousness. The police secured the residence and discovered no evidence of forced entry. Mark, visibly distressed, told the police that he shot the man after witnessing the attack on his wife. Mark described how he was in the basement on the treadmill when he heard noises upstairs, prompting him to investigate. He found their adopted baby Bailey on the bed in the master bedroom, but no sign of Donna. When Mark heard more noises downstairs, he grabbed his handgun from the bedroom nightstand and headed for the dining room. Mark saw a man in the hallway wielding a hammer and assaulting Donna. Mark shot the man, and as he attempted to rise, he fired a second shot. The police discovered the bloodied hammer used in the assault, which belonged to both Donna and Mark. The house also contained a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, which Mark confirmed was the weapon used. When Mark asked about the identity of the man who had attacked his wife, the police confirmed that it was Roger. Mark then said, "That's the man who has been harassing my wife this week." According to Mark, Donna had traveled to Florida to visit her parents 6 days before. Her mother dropped her off at the airport, and a driver named Roger hired through a limousine company in St. Louis, Missouri, drove her back to Springfield. According to Mark Donna, Roger was excessively talking and flirtatious during the 2-hour drive, expressing a preference for older women and inviting them to intimate parties. The conversation took a dark turn when he revealed hearing a disturbing voice named Dom instructing him to harm others. Mark called the cops, saying the guy scared her. She stated that he was extremely frightening. He threatened to kill people, set car bombs, and mutilate them. Dawn has returned to Springfield. She informed her family about the unsettling encounter, expressing fear and discomfort as a result of the disturbing conversation and erratic driving. Mark told the police that, despite safely returning home, the situation persisted. Donna received several strange phone calls, and based on the timing, she suspected Roger was the caller. The police found a note in the house that described Donna's unsettling car ride. Mark also told the police that he reported the incident to Roger's employer, which resulted in Roger's suspension, which Mark believed could have exacerbated the situation. The police discovered Roger's car parked outside the Winger house, facing the wrong direction. They discovered various weapons inside, including a knife and a tire iron. Authorities concluded that Mark acted in self-defense, and they chose not to press charges due to the traumatic circumstances. The case was closed with an acknowledgement that Mark had already experienced significant distress. Mark appeared deeply affected by the events. Mark and Donna had moved to Springfield shortly after their wedding, where they discovered happiness. Donna worked as an operating room technician at Memorial Medical Center, and Mark was an engineer with the Illinois Department of Nuclear Safety. Despite facing challenges, such as Donna's initial distress at learning she couldn't conceive, their lives took a positive turn when a doctor informed them of a teenager willing to place her baby for adoption. On June 1, 1995, Donna and Mark happily welcomed Bailey, their adopted daughter. Following Donna's tragic death, Bailey, now responsible for the infant, chose to remain in the same house. To help with childcare, he hired a nanny, Rebecca Simic. Rebecca unexpectedly became pregnant a few months into her job and gave birth to a daughter named Anna. Mark and Rebecca married just over a year after Donna died. Mark decided to sell the house and sever ties with Donna's family. The new family, Mark, Rebecca, Bailey, and Anna, relocated to a different town. They gradually expanded their family by adding 2 more children, Maggie and Ben. Donna's close friend Donna Schultz told the police in 1999 that she had an affair with Mark while Donna was still alive, and that Mark made troubling statements that she remembered. Mark believes it would be easier for us to be together if Dawn had just died. All you'd have to do is enter and find the body. Donna also provided disturbing information that raised concerns with the authorities. When Mark learned about Donna's unsettling experience during the car ride back to Springfield, he allegedly told her that he needed the driver in his home. This revelation prompted the police to reopen Donna's case. However, they were disappointed to find that some evidence had gone missing. Mark filed a civil lawsuit against BART Transportation, seeking accountability for Diana's death as a result of Roger's actions. Roger's attorney requested access to the civil suit's evidence and files because he worked for BART Transportation at the time Diana died. Despite this, the police were able to save some files and access photos taken on the day of the incident. Donna and Roger are shown on the ground before being transported to the hospital. However, the positions of the bodies appeared to contradict Mark's earlier account, given to the police years ago. Mark told the police that he saw Roger kneeling beside Donna's head, assaulting her with a hammer, which prompted him to open fire. Mark claimed Roger fell backward, and in an attempt to get up, Mark shot him again. According to Mark's description, Roger's feet should have been near Donna's head, facing the opposite direction. However, after reviewing the photos taken by the police upon their arrival, it appeared that Roger and Donna were both on the ground, facing the same direction. This inconsistency prompted the police, for the first time, to suspect Mark of being involved in his wife's murder. The question of why Roger was at their house that day remained unanswered. Simultaneously, during the civil suit involving Mark, a possible explanation emerged. BART Transportation hired a blood spatter expert who concluded that the blood spatter patterns indicated Mark's involvement in the deaths of Donna and Roger. As the police dug deeper into the case, they discovered more incriminating evidence. Susan Collins, Roger's roommate, informed law enforcement that she overheard Roger arranging a meeting with someone on the day he was killed. Furthermore, a note written on a bank deposit slip inside Roger's car was discovered, which contained Mark's name, address, and a time. Susan informed the police that Roger had mentioned agreeing to meet with Mark to resolve issues raised by Mark's complaints about Roger's driving and the concerning conversation he had with Donna. Roger left the house around 3:30 p.m. and the note indicated a meeting time of 4:30 p.m., which corresponded to the prosecution's belief that Mark had asked him to come to the house at that time. On August 23, 2001, Mark was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. The prosecution claimed that Mark was responsible for Donna and Roger's deaths. They claimed that Mark wanted to remove Donna from his life, but did not want to risk losing custody of their adopted daughter Bailey, so he avoided divorce. Mark allegedly saw an opportunity when he learned about Donna's problems with Roger, seeing it as an ideal opportunity to eliminate Donna and frame an innocent man. The prosecution proposed that Mark contact Roger, whom he had never met before that day, and invite him to the house. When Roger arrived, Mark allegedly led him inside and fatally shot him. This narrative was supported by the fact that there was no forced entry at the residence. The prosecution also claimed that Donna, who was in the master bedroom with Bailey when she heard the gunshot, went downstairs and was beaten to death with a hammer by Mark before dialing 911. The prosecution used a note found in Roger's car, which contained Mark's name and address, to prove that Mark had lured Roger to the house. The jury discovered that despite having weapons in his car, Roger did not bring them into the house and instead used Donna's hammer to attack. This raised questions about Roger's intentions, assuming he had gone there with the intent of assaulting Donna. The court was also made aware of inconsistencies between the location Mark claimed Roger was in when he shot him and photos taken on the same day, which contradicted Mark's account. Dean's testimony was crucial in shedding light on Mark's alleged statements, expressing a desire for Donna's death. The court learned that on August 25, 1995, 4 days before the murders, Mark inquired with his coworker Candace Bolden about the fate of his adopted daughter if Donna died. Later that day, Mark complained to Ray Duffy, the president of the transportation company where Roger worked, about Donna's ride. Mark called back a few days later, asking for the driver's full name and expressing a desire to speak with him directly about the situation. During the trial, the court was informed of Donna and Roger's severe injuries. When the cops arrived at the house, Donna was found face down on the floor, with Roger on his back. Donna died from brain trauma caused by multiple blunt force injuries to the head, consistent with hammer strikes. Roger died from brain trauma caused by gunshot wounds to the top left side of his head and above his left eyebrow, as well as contusions on his chest from hammer strikes. The defense argued that Roger's erratic decisions that day, such as his weapon choice and unusual parking, demonstrated mental instability. His behavior during the car ride with Donna supported the claim they made. Concerning the position of the bodies in the photos, the defense argued that while Donna and Roger were critical when paramedics arrived, they were not dead and they may have moved in an attempt to save their lives. However, the paramedics denied moving them before the photographs were taken, and Mark did not testify at the trial. Regarding Deanne's testimony, the defense claimed she was motivated by personal feelings of rejection. While Mark admitted to having an affair with Donna, he married the nanny he hired shortly after Donna died. The defense claimed Donna harbored resentment for not being chosen by Mark to marry. Despite the defense's arguments, the jury convicted Mark of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. While still serving time for his first-degree murder convictions, Mark became involved in a failed murder, for-hire plot, in 2005. He allegedly attempted to orchestrate attacks on Deanne for testifying against him, as well as on Jeffrey Gilman, a childhood friend, for failing to post his $1 million bail. Investigators discovered 19 handwritten pages that detailed Mark's desires for Donna. He allegedly wanted her kidnapped and forced to write a statement recounting her testimony, claiming Mark's innocence before plotting her death. Mark claimed in court that these notes were simply a fantasy he never intended to carry out. Despite Mark's assertion, he was found guilty of soliciting murder and sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison. Donna's mother, Sarah Jane, and stepfather, Ira Drescher, responded strongly to the evidence against Mark, emphasizing the brutality of Donna's murder. What makes it difficult to understand is how he murdered Donna in such a vicious and violent manner. Throughout the legal proceedings, Mark has maintained his innocence. Donna, who testified against him, was granted immunity and received no charges as a result. Share your opinion with us in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In May 2007, a suspect was formally identified by Portuguese police looking into the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, who vanished while on vacation in the Algarve 15 years ago. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from her family's vacation rental in Praia da Luz, Portugal, on May 3, 2007. The investigation reached a number of dead ends, in spite of extensive worldwide media coverage and extensive searches conducted in several nations, including Portugal, the UK, Spain, Germany, and Morocco. Time and resources were wasted as a result of the deluge of misleading hints, unreliable reports, and unconfirmed tips. Every lead was followed by major media outlets like the BBC, Sky News, and The Guardian, but none of them produced the breakthrough that everyone had been hoping for. Did authorities discover her whereabouts years later? Why has this case remained one of the most perplexing disappearances in history? And what went wrong? Now, let's explore the narrative. Interest in the enigmatic disappearance of Madeleine McCann has been rekindled by a new search in a new location. When she was a toddler on a family vacation in Portugal in 2007, she vanished. Every family wished for a vacation like this one. Kate and Jerry McCann, both in their late 30s, had been putting in a lot of effort in their respective medical professions. They decided it was time for a break. After years of juggling their family and work lives, they made travel arrangements to Portugal's Algarve, a well-liked vacation spot for British families. On May 3, 2007, they left for what was supposed to be a quiet week at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz with their 3 kids, twins Sean and Amélie, as well as their oldest daughter, Madeleine. At the time, Madeleine, their 3rd child, was 3 years old. The family stayed at the resort in a spacious, cozy apartment. Despite the basic lodging, the location was ideal for a restful vacation. The McCanns were a close-knit, loving, and well-educated family that was perfect in many respects. In addition to being doctors, Kate and Jerry were also loving parents who were very involved in their kids' lives. They chose a family-friendly resort with a kids' club and lots of activities because they had carefully planned their trip. They weren't the kind to take chances or neglect the security of their kids. Actually, the resort was known for being safe, so they were at ease knowing that their kids would be protected while they spent some peaceful time together. But everything would change on the night of May 3, 2007. A night that nobody could have foreseen. After spending the day at the resort, Kate and Jerry McCann made the decision to have a quiet dinner with friends at a nearby tapas restaurant on the evening of May 3, 2007. In their apartment, their 3 kids, Madeleine, Amélie, and Sean, were fast asleep. The couple took turns checking on them and felt at ease leaving them alone for brief periods of time. Kate checked on the children at 9:30 p.m. She discovered that everything was in order. Madeleine seemed to be sleeping soundly in her bed, and Sean and Amélie were both sleeping soundly. Their friend, who was staying next door, Matthew Oldfield, later offered to come see how the kids were doing. The door to the children's bedroom was open when he went to check on himself, but he didn't look any further and couldn't remember if the window or shutter was open. Kate returned to see how the kids were doing at around 10 o'clock at night. The patio doors were unlocked when she stepped inside. Due to an open window, the door of the children's bedroom slammed shut on its own as she attempted to close it. At that moment, she noticed that Madeleine was gone and that the window and its shutter were open. Kate yelled, "Madeleine's gone," as she hurried back to the restaurant in panic. "She's been taken." Approximately 10:10 p.m., Matthew Oldfield was asked by Jerry McCann to go to the resort's reception and call the police on May 3, 2007. At 10:30, hotel employees and visitors started the resort's missing child procedure by looking around for Madeleine. After searching for hours, they still couldn't find her, although at first they thought she might have gone missing. Together with their friends, the McCanns broadened their search by calling Madeleine's name and knocking on doors. Panic increased as the evening wore on. Their fear only grew as each minute seemed to drag on for an hour. Even though Kate and Jerry were desperate to find their daughter, it seemed to be getting harder as time went on. Despite their best efforts to remain strong for their other children, they were overcome with pain and anxiety, and the uncertainty was nearly unbearable. But the police's reaction wasn't the best. Around 11:10 p.m., two Guardia Nacional Republicana (GNR) officers showed up at the resort. Following a quick search, they called the criminal police, or Policia Judiciaria (PJ), who showed up at around 1 in the morning. Search dogs were brought in by 2 a.m., and by 8 a.m. the police had broadened their search to include nearby caves, wells, and waterways. But during what are referred to as the golden hours of a missing person case, errors were made. Roadblocks did not appear right away, and it took hours for border and marine police to be notified. Numerous resort employees were never interviewed, and important surveillance footage was never requested. After samples were sent to 3 forensic labs, Madeleine's bedroom was found to contain the DNA of an unidentified stranger. However, the evidence might have been compromised because by the time the apartment was sealed off, about 20 people had already entered the room. The investigation was further delayed when Interpol took 5 days to issue a global missing person alert. It was useless by the time the police put tape across the door at 3 in the morning. Crowds were reportedly assembling outside the apartment, including close to the window of the kid's bedroom, which is where the kidnapper may have entered. Even police officers contaminated the scene by handling the evidence improperly. One even dusted the window shutter for fingerprints without gloves. Robert Murat, a British-Portuguese property consultant, was the first suspect 12 days after Madeleine McCann vanished. Murat, who had been involved in the case and offered to assist with translations, lived close to the McCannans' apartment. He was questioned and his house and possessions were searched extensively, but no evidence connected him to Madeleine's disappearance was found. After his suspect status was revoked in July 2008, he was awarded hefty damages for defamation. Portuguese police did not take the McCann's suggestion in June 2007 to use a former police officer's matter orientation system to help find their daughter seriously. The Portuguese police responded by writing to the British government to request more help. As a result, Keela and Eddie, 2 British sniffer dogs, arrived in July 2007. The investigation took a darker turn, despite the fact that there was no proof whatsoever that Madeleine was dead or that the McCannses were responsible for her disappearance. A number of witnesses reported seeing suspicious people in the vicinity of apartment 5A in the days preceding Madeleine's disappearance, including a man acting strangely close to the apartment and men collecting money for fictitious charities. A man with blonde hair was also frequently spotted observing the McCannans' block. In spite of this, the investigation did not immediately make any progress. However, what took place that evening? Was a random crime the cause of Madeleine's disappearance? Or was there a darker motive at work? The reasons behind her disappearance have been the subject of several theories, some of which we will discuss later. Let's examine the DNA analysis in more detail for the time being. Hair and fibers from apartment 5A and the McCann's vehicle were sent for DNA analysis in August 2007. The findings on August 8 moved the investigation from kidnapping to murder. The forensic lab employed a contentious, easily contaminated low-copy number DNA technique. A partial match to Madeleine's DNA was discovered in the car's boot on September 3, but the findings were not conclusive. This raised questions about the validity of the results by implying that the DNA might belong to several different people. The McCanns were formally designated as arguidos, suspects, by September 2007. Although DNA evidence from the apartment and their rental car was provided, the findings were ambiguous and complicated. In spite of this, the Portuguese police urged the McCanns to confess and speculated that Madeleine might have died in an accident. Due to a lack of evidence, the case was later archived in 2008 after receiving progressively negative media coverage. A thorough police investigation was warranted for Madeleine McCann. A dearth of evidence presented significant difficulties for the investigation in the days after Madeleine McCann vanished. No forensic evidence indicated a crime scene, no indications of forced entry into the apartment, and no definitive answers regarding Madeleine's fate were found. The following theories surfaced. 1. During an abduction by a sex offender, many initially thought that Madeleine had been kidnapped by a sex offender who had broken into the apartment while the McCanns were eating. The door to the children's bedroom was discovered ajar, and suspicious men were spotted all over the resort. But there were concerns about how the kidnapper could have gotten in undetected or without leaving any evidence of forced entry. 2. Robbery wrong. According to a different theory, Madeleine was taken during a robbery that went awry. It's possible that thieves broke into the apartment to take valuables, but when they discovered the kids inside, they kidnapped Madeleine. Witnesses reported seeing suspicious men around the apartment, and there had been several reported burglaries in the area. 3. Accident and cover-up. According to this theory, Madeleine may have overdosed on medication or died in another accident while she was in the apartment. The McCanns may have attempted to conceal the death and make it seem like an abduction in a panic. Although some investigators noted discrepancies in the McCanns' account, this theory was not substantiated by any tangible evidence. 4. Suspicious woman. On the evening of May 3, 2007, a number of witnesses claimed to have seen an odd woman close to the McCanns' apartment. Although she was said to be acting strangely and wearing a purple top, there was no evidence linking her to Madeleine's disappearance. Though each theory had its proponents, none of them was able to provide a definitive explanation for Madeleine's disappearance. The mystery remained unsolved, despite the investigation's continued exploration of every potential lead. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann swiftly gained international media attention. What began as a missing child story quickly became a worldwide event. The media started to doubt the McCannans' involvement as the investigation was postponed, with some conjecturing that they might be concealing something. According to reports, a police dog picked up the smell of blood in the McCannans' rental car and apartment, which heightened suspicions that they might be behind Madeleine's disappearance. A media frenzy ensued, with the world waiting for answers that never materialized, from what began as sympathy for the McCanns. On September 9, 2007, the McCannans left the UK, even though they were named as suspects in their daughter's disappearance case. Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida came to the conclusion in a report on September 10, 2007, that Madeleine had died inadvertently in the family's apartment, and that the McCannans had staged the kidnapping with the assistance of their friends. A leaked diplomatic cable from September 28, 2007, which showed that US and UK authorities were cooperating on the case, provided more evidence in support of this theory. Tensions with the McCanns grew when they declined to take part in a police reconstruction. Even though Portuguese police had broadened their investigation in October 2007, when the Portuguese Attorney General declared on July 21, 2008, that there was no evidence connecting the McCannans or Robert Murat to Madeleine's disappearance, the investigation was declared closed. But only a few weeks later, on August 4, 2008, the authorities acknowledged the lack of conclusive evidence and made thousands of pages of case files public. Following Madeleine McCann's disappearance, her parents established the Madeleine's Fund, which by March 2008 had amassed over PS 1.8 million. With assistance from individuals such as J.K., the fund provided a PS 2.5 million reward for leads, including Rowling and Simon Cowell. Control Risks and Mateto 3, two private investigators the McCanns hired, may have produced some results in Morocco. In 2008, tensions grew between the McCannans and the Portuguese police. They hired Oakley International, which produced e-fits of a suspect, 4 PS 500,000. When Scotland Yard released these e-fits in 2013, they caused a stir because they had been kept secret until then. The Sunday Times later paid the McCannans PS 55,000 in damages for publishing the story. The McCanns met with British Home Secretary Alan Johnson in 2009 to ask that Madeleine's case be reviewed. Jim Gamble's 2010 report, which criticized the British and Portuguese authorities' lack of coordination and suggested closer cooperation, was the result of this. The British government began Operation Grange, a thorough investigation of the case by Scotland Yard, in May 2011 under Home Secretary Theresa May. A petition from the Sun newspaper served as one of the catalysts for this. By July 2013, the investigation had grown from a team of 29 detectives to a full-scale operation. Over the years, the team looked into hundreds of potential sightings and sex offenders, translated documents, and published age-progressed photos. The investigation's scope was reduced by 2016, but in 2018, the Home Secretary authorized more funding, raising the overall cost to PS 11.6 million. In order to continue the investigation, there were additional extensions in 2018 and 2019. Calls made close to the Ocean Club around the time Madeleine vanished were tracked by police in 2014 using mobile phone tracking. After being questioned, the former bus driver and his associates denied any involvement. Euclid Monteiro, a former employee of the Ocean Club whose phone was found close to the scene, was another important person. No evidence connected him to Madeleine's case, despite the fact that he had previously been questioned about break-ins, and he passed away in 2009. During the same raid on Scotland Yard, believing Montero was responsible, issued a request for information in March 2014 regarding a man implicated in sexual assaults in vacation homes in the Algarve. Interviews with 4 Portuguese nationals produced no leads, and a thorough search in Praia da Luz in June 2014 produced no fresh evidence. 11 individuals, including Robert Murat's associates, were questioned later in December, but once more, no significant results were obtained. More than 8,600 sightings of Madeleine had been reported globally by 2016, but none of them were deemed credible. Scotland Yard kept investigating every lead, but she was nowhere to be found. Authorities were hopeful that the remaining pieces of the puzzle, including cell site data and leads about possible suspects, including local suspects offenders, would eventually come together as the investigation continued. 10 years after Madeleine vanished, in 2017, her parents continued to hold out hope. They felt that someone out there knew what had happened, so they vowed to keep looking for as long as it took. Meanwhile, authorities in Braunschweig, Germany, got a vital tip regarding Christian B., who allegedly admitted to a friend in 2017 that he was aware of Madeleine's fate. German police made a shocking announcement in June 2020. They had a new top suspect in Madeleine McCann's disappearance. Christian Bruckner, the suspect, was a 43-year-old convicted sexual offender with a history of unsettling offenses. This new lead gave the investigation new hope after years of dead ends. Bruckner had a troubling criminal history. He had a lengthy criminal history that included drug trafficking, sexual abuse, and burglaries during the previous 30 years. Authorities characterized him as an empathetic psychopath who preyed on defenseless girls. When Bruckner was found guilty of sexual abuse in Germany in 1994, his criminal career officially began. He carried on committing crimes after fleeing to Portugal, such as robbing hotels and vacation rentals close to the Praia da Luz resort. Bruckner's actions on the night of Madeleine's disappearance were connected by German police. 3 primary suspects, 2 men and a woman, who were spotted with a girl who looked like Madeleine, are the subject of the most recent development. Investigators found that Bruckner's cell phone had made a call close to the resort an hour prior to her disappearance. The day after Madeleine vanished, investigators discovered that Bruckner had left Portugal and registered his vehicle to someone else. Did he know more than he was revealing, or was this merely a coincidence? When investigators found troubling evidence connecting Bruckner to other crimes, it appeared that his involvement was even more likely. Bruckner was discovered to have posted about his fantasies of abusing children in a Skype pedophile chat room in 2013. It raised suspicions even though he didn't bring up Madeleine. Then, in 2016, investigators discovered images and videos of child abuse in an abandoned factory that had once belonged to Bruckner. Police took years to link Bruckner to Madeleine's case even though he was a known criminal, but when they looked further, they discovered that he had 68 videos and 391 pictures of child pornography. Christian Bruckner was given a 7-year prison sentence in December 2019 for the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American woman in Portugal, close to Praia da Luz, where Madeleine McCann's family had been lodging. It is thought that Bruckner assaulted the woman, another woman, and a teenager during the assault, which was caught on camera. Portuguese authorities did not disclose the person's identity, but by 2022 they had named him an official suspect in Madeleine's case. Both German and British police had requested the announcement. Whether Bruckner was the suspect or if someone else had surfaced was unclear. Bruckner's criminal record also included drug trafficking sentences. The Barragem do Arade Reservoir, located approximately 30 miles from Praia da Luz, was searched for 3 days by Portuguese and German authorities in May 2023 after Madeleine vanished. In 2008, A lawyer said he had previously searched the area after receiving information from his criminal contacts that Madeleine's body might be there. Bruckner was also on trial in Germany for rape and sexual assault, with the attacks allegedly taking place in Portugal from 2002 to 2017. An email account connected to Madeleine's disappearance was discovered by authorities, according to a German investigator in June 2024. Bruckner was purportedly connected to the account. A second email account used to disseminate pictures of child abuse was also discovered by investigators. Remarkably, the emails associated with this account were erased soon after Madeleine vanished in early 2007. In a separate trial in October 2024, a German court cleared Christian Bruckner, although he has not been charged in Madeleine's case. Bruckner, 47, is currently serving a 7-year prison sentence in Germany for rape. According to the defense, there was not enough proof to find him guilty of the charges. Although no charges have been filed against him in relation to the case, Bruckner is still the main suspect in her disappearance, even though prosecutors had pushed for an additional 15-year sentence. Though they need more proof before they can charge him, German investigators continue to believe Christian Bruckner may have been involved in Madeleine McCann's disappearance. They cite his history of targeting young girls, cell phone records, and suspicious behavior as important connections to the case. "We will never give up hope of finding Madeleine alive," the McCanns wrote on their website, expressing their continued optimism. "But in order to find peace, we must know the truth regardless of the result." The investigation goes on while Bruckner remains silent in prison. Is there more to the story? Or is he the one at fault? We live with this doubt in our hearts, even though we don't know what happened. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Teresa Halbach vanished in October 2005 following her visit to the Avery salvage yard in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. Although her car was discovered abandoned, the investigation quickly came to a standstill because the leads were unproductive. Police searched for the truth despite a number of unfounded theories and contradicting reports. As time went on, the case attracted national attention, sparking interest and inquiry. Family members and friends were in a desperate search for Teresa's whereabouts. What was Teresa's actual fate? Was something far more sinister responsible for her disappearance, or was it a tragic accident? Let's investigate this perplexing case. Teresa's small hometown was Calumet County, which is well known for its cheese. Teresa's early years and promising future were set against the tranquil and picturesque backdrop of the area. Born on March 22, 1980. Teresa Halbach was raised in Wisconsin's Calumet County. Prior to her life being tragically cut short at the age of 25, she was a young woman with a bright future. She was raised on a dairy farm as one of 5 siblings in a loving household. Teresa was a remarkable student, in addition to being a girl from a small town. She came home to begin her life after graduating from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay in 2002. Teresa, who lived in a farmhouse next door to her parents and was still figuring out what she wanted to do with her life, was like many people in their 20s. She spent a lot of time with her parents and siblings and was close to them. She even served as the volleyball coach for her younger sister. They enjoyed spending time together on the family farm, watching Extreme Makeover and hanging out. She had always had a passion for photography, which she turned into a career in 2005. Teresa was a freelance photographer who documented events and weddings. She even took pictures of cars for sale while working for Autotrader.com, an American online marketplace for auto buyers and sellers. She first met Stephen Avery through this freelance work, and he hired her to photograph a car at his family's auto salvage yard. Wrapped automobiles, parts, and equipment were strewn all over the 40-acre Avery auto salvage yard. Their sister Barb lived on the property with her 3 sons, Brendan Dassey and her boyfriend Scott Taddick, while Stephen and his brother Charles managed the yard. Earlier in the year, Teresa had made multiple trips to the salvage yard to take pictures of cars for Stephen, but she wasn't particularly eager to return. According to reports, she once told a coworker that she found it unsettling that Stephen had answered the door while only wearing a towel. Who wouldn't be uneasy in that circumstance? On Halloween Day 2005, Teresa consented to return for one last photo session despite her discomfort. She would, regrettably, be seen alive for the very last time. Teresa Halbach showed up at the Avery salvage yard to take pictures of a car on the afternoon of Halloween 2005. She had a straightforward plan: take the pictures and go. But things took a turn for the worse, and Teresa's family reported her missing by November 3. She had gone to the salvage yard a few days ago and no one had seen or heard from her since. Concerns were raised when she failed to return her mother's calls. Teresa was a self-sufficient young lady with a busy life, and although her family was naturally concerned, they also assumed she might simply be out having fun. However, Teresa's family realized something was amiss when she disappeared for days at a time without speaking. Town volunteers came together to look for her, but they didn't make a significant finding until November 5th. Teresa parked her Toyota RAV4 on the Avery property. Strangely, wood, branches, and even the hood of another car were all over the car. Was the car concealed? That has been the subject of conjecture. The car appeared to have been attempted to be hidden, but it was unsuccessful. Why would anyone need to conceal a car when there are so many on the property? It made people wonder why the car was covered, but it was never made clear why. Police obtained a search warrant after finding Teresa's car at the Avery salvage yard, and between November 5 and November 12, they conducted 6 searches on the property. Police kept a close eye on Stephen Avery for the majority of the day. Officers seized a flatbed truck and a car from his family's retreat in the North Woods. Several troubling pieces of evidence were found during these searches. Investigators discovered burned bone fragments in a burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage. These were subsequently determined by DNA testing to be Teresa's remains. Remains of Teresa's cell phone, Palm Pilot, and camera were discovered in a burn barrel on the property, and blood was discovered in the front and cargo sections of her RAV4. Police discovered 2 firearms, including a rifle, and Teresa's car key in Stephen Avery's bedroom during a search of his home. After several months, additional searches turned up a bullet and pieces in Avery's garage that were connected to the rifle that had been found in his house. Even though the bullet contained DNA evidence, it was still unclear whose DNA it belonged to, which led to more questions about the case. Although this body of evidence eventually strengthened the case against Stephen Avery, it raised controversy and left many questions unanswered. Stephen Avery made an initial statement without legal representation when he was questioned. That was the last time he saw her, he said. Law enforcement, however, soon began to doubt his account. Things quickly got out of hand when he was first arrested on suspicion of possessing illegal firearms on the property. On November 15, a few days later, Stephen Avery was formally charged with Teresa Halbach's murder. The amount of his bail was $500,000. Investigators had little reason to doubt the evidence, especially the blood, bones, car key, and firearm. The fact that Stephen Avery was no stranger to law enforcement is what makes his case so remarkable. This brings us to Stephen Avery's troubled past. He was raised on his family's 40-acre salvage yard in rural Gibson after being born in Manitowoc County in 1962. He had a reported IQ of 70 and struggled academically, attending special education classes. Avery served 10 months after being found guilty of robbing a bar when she was 18. He was imprisoned for a year in 1982 after being found guilty of animal cruelty for burning a cat alive. Avery was given a 6-year sentence in 1985 for threatening his cousin with a gun, but soon after, in 1985, Avery was falsely convicted of the vicious sexual assault and attempted murder of Penny Bjornson, marking the beginning of the most important chapter in his criminal history. Bjornson identified Avery despite his alibi and sentenced him to 32 years in prison. Avery was exonerated in 2002 after the Wisconsin Innocence Project took up his case and used DNA testing to prove that Gregory Allen was the real culprit. Avery was released in 2003 after serving 18 years. In order to recover $36 million for the erroneous conviction, he subsequently brought a civil suit against Manitowoc County and its representatives. When Teresa Halbach vanished in 2005, the lawsuit was still pending. In 2006, the case was resolved for $400,000. Investigators interviewed a number of people who lived or worked at the Avery salvage yard while Stephen Avery awaited trial for Teresa Halbach's murder. Stephen's 16-year-old nephew Brendan Dassey was one individual who attracted their attention. Although Brendan Dassey was not initially considered a suspect by the police in February 2006, they thought he might have some information regarding Teresa Halbach's disappearance. They believed he was keeping his uncle safe. However, Brendan started making statements during the interrogation that weren't consistent with the actions of an innocent person, which raised questions. Police believed Brendan had important information after an initial interview. Brendan had a borderline IQ, which is lower than the average. Brendan was 16 years old, but his comprehension and skills were more akin to those of a younger child. Brendan was interviewed twice more by investigators without his mother or legal representative present. They got his mother's approval prior to the last interview. The date of this controversial interview was March 1, 2006. Brendan admitted to taking part in Teresa's multiple-hour sexual assault, murder, and mutilation during this session. Brendan was told by police that they were already aware of the specifics. Brendan gave a detailed statement, clearly frightened. He said that after coming home from school, he was asked to enter his uncle's trailer where he discovered Teresa bound. As Teresa begged for assistance, his uncle allegedly encouraged him to sexually abuse her. Brendan claimed that his uncle convinced him to comply, and that after that, his uncle shot and stabbed Teresa. Brendan cut Teresa's throat at his uncle's order. A startling change occurred when Brendan was arrested and charged with sexual assault, murder, and corpse mutilation, but at that time, there was no supporting evidence for his confession. In any event, Stephen and Brendan were put on trial, and it went forward independently. The trial of Stephen Avery started first. Blood in Teresa's car, a spent bullet that matched Stephen's rifle and Teresa's DNA, and a key to her car discovered in Stephen's trailer that contained his DNA, were among the many pieces of evidence the prosecutors produced. Stephen's blood was found inside Teresa's car, and his DNA was found beneath the hood fastener. On Avery's land, Teresa's burned remains and possessions were discovered. Stephen made 2 calls to Teresa's cell phone, one with and one without the 67 feature to hide his identity, according to phone records. The 67 feature makes the call appear private or unknown and prevents your phone number from appearing on the recipient's caller ID. These sparked suspicions and implied that Stephen might not have known the 67 call could be traced by the police. Brendan's older brother Bobby Dassey testified that on the afternoon of Teresa's murder, he saw her making her way to Stephen's trailer. He also gave critical testimony after overhearing Stephen talking about Teresa's body disposal in a subsequent conversation. Stephen's defense team contended that Manitowoc County Police framed him because of his $36 million lawsuit against them, despite the evidence appearing to be against him. They claimed that police used evidence from a prior wrongful conviction case to plant blood in Teresa's car. The main evidence, according to the defense team, cast doubt on it. Only Stephen's DNA, not Teresa's, was present in the key to Teresa's car that was discovered in Stephen's trailer. This was odd, because the key to Teresa's car should have contained her DNA. It was possible that the key was planted and Stephen was framed because Teresa's DNA was missing and Stephen's DNA was present, indicating evidence tampering. The jury's decision was unambiguous. Stephen Avery was found guilty of all charges and given a life sentence. Brendan Dassey's trial, which lasted only a few days, came shortly after in April 2007. Brendan's confession was a key component of the prosecution's case against him, and its veracity was hotly contested. There are concerning indications when examining Brendan's police interview in detail. After being questioned for hours, he made statements that appeared to acknowledge his guilt, but many people thought they were fabricated and unreliable. Investigators questioned Brendan for more details after he described the alleged assault and murder. "That's all I can remember," Brendan said hesitantly when asked about Teresa's head injuries. The officer pressed him further and asked who had shot her in the head. After a while, Brendan acknowledged that he had done it. Brendan responded that he was unable to think of it at the moment when the officer questioned him about why he hadn't brought it up earlier. This conversation sparked worries that Brendan's answers might have been swayed by the investigators, who may have led him to divulge information that wasn't entirely consistent with his own memory. Brendan withdrew his confession during his trial and said he was under pressure from the police. At first, his involvement had been supported by physical evidence, such as bleach stains on his jeans. Brendan, however, provided a different explanation, claiming that the stains were the result of cleaning a garage rather than a crime scene. Notably, Brendan was not directly connected to Teresa's murder by any DNA or supporting evidence. Brendan's conviction raised questions about the fairness of his trial because it was based primarily on his dubious confession. Despite his lower intellectual capacity, he was tried as an adult at the age of 17. In 2048, he received a life sentence with the possibility of release. There were continuous discussions concerning the validity of his confession and the fairness of his conviction, which kept the case contentious. Avery's request for a new trial was denied by a state appeals court in August 2011, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court affirmed the ruling in 2013. In 2012, Avery was transferred to the Waupun Correctional Institution after 5 years of service at the Wisconsin Secure Program facility in Boscobel. Dassey's attorneys petitioned for his release in December 2015, claiming his confession was coerced and that he had incompetent legal representation. The documentary Making a Murderer, which followed the legal disputes between Stephen Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey, was made available on Netflix in 2015. It questioned their guilt by looking into their arrests, trials, and convictions. Brendan's confession, the dubious evidence against Stephen, and the tense relationship between Avery and the local police force, which resulted in his erroneous conviction in the 1980, were the main topics of the series. Many people questioned whether Stephen and Brendan had fair trials after watching the documentary, which sparked a lot of discussion and drew a sizable audience. Although it highlighted potential injustices, some detractors believed it might have been biased and omitted important information. In 2016, Stephen Avery's case was taken on by famous lawyer Kathleen Zellner, who fought for wrongful convictions. A Chicago-based attorney named Kathleen Zellner ascended to the Hall of Fame by defending numerous people who had been unfairly convicted. With a track record of overturning convictions, Zellner started investigating alternative explanations for the case. She sought to demonstrate that other suspects might have been involved in Teresa Halbach's death and that the evidence used at trial did not support Avery's guilt. Together with her public advocacy, Zellner's efforts brought the case back into the public eye and maintained the debate over Avery's innocence. The process of making a murderer was not totally impartial. Some critics contend that the prosecution's decision to not participate distorted the facts. They allowed the documentary to mostly represent the defense's viewpoint and left many questions unanswered. Some viewers speculated that the prosecution's decision to remain out was made in order to avoid re-examining the validity of Avery's prior erroneous conviction. The documentary spurred discussion and increased awareness, but it omitted crucial information. For instance, it didn't go into detail about the calls Stephen Avery made to Teresa Halbach's phone, which some consider to be important pieces of evidence. Additionally, it ignored Teresa's prior interactions with Avery, including rumors that she felt uncomfortable around him. Additionally, Making a Murderer minimized Stephen Avery's past violent actions, especially against women. Even though this does not establish his guilt on its own, it does point to a troubling pattern of aggression that should not be disregarded when looking into the case. Important pieces of evidence, like the bullet that was discovered to have Teresa's DNA on it and that matched Avery's rifle, were also mostly overlooked in the documentary. Although this evidence was difficult to ignore, the series paid little attention to it. In Avery's case, the defense contended that the blood sample had been altered and revealed a hole in the stopper. However, a nurse later disclosed that the hole was a routine practice and that the seal had already been broken by Avery's defense team. In the end, the tampering claim was untrue. Additionally, Brendan Dassey's contentious interrogation was minimized in the documentary. Brendan, who has a mild intellectual disability, spent hours being questioned without his mother or attorney present. The reliability of his confession, which was crucial to his conviction, was called into question because it was erratic and appeared to have been influenced by leading police questions. There was no tangible evidence linking Brendan to the crime scene, despite the fact that his confession was essential to the prosecution's case. Thus, his conviction depended almost entirely on the confession, even though there were doubts about how it was obtained. The possibility that Brendan's statements were coerced, or that his age and intellectual limitations made him susceptible to manipulation, was not sufficiently addressed in the documentary. The documentary left viewers with more questions than answers, even though it may have ignited a global movement for justice. The question of whether these two men were genuinely guilty or the victims of a seriously defective legal system was once more complicated. Parts of Brendan's confession were later allegedly misplaced in the Making a Murderer documentary, which, when watched in its entirety, may provide additional insight into the way the police interrogated Brendan. Notwithstanding the media attention, the question still stands. What is the current status of the cases, and have Teresa Halbach and her family received justice? Brendan Dassey's supporters had hope when his conviction was momentarily overturned in 2016. The courts determined that his confession was not coerced, which was the primary question at hand. Experts contend that the courts did not fully take into account concerns regarding his age and intellectual disability, which raised concerns about his vulnerability during interrogation. 2018 saw the U.S. hopes for federal relief were dashed when the Supreme Court decided not to hear Brendan Dassey's case. His legal options are limited because the governor of Wisconsin has also declined to pardon him. His release is still uncertain, and many people still feel that justice has not been done, even though fresh evidence may reopen his case. On the other hand, even after Stephen Avery's appeals were repeatedly rejected, his case is still contentious. Kathleen Zellner, Avery's lawyer, is still arguing for a retrial and additional evidence testing, pointing to incompetent counsel and suppressed evidence. But thus far, these attempts have failed, and Avery's conviction remains. The legal issues Avery is facing appear to be challenging, even as Zellner keeps up her efforts on his behalf. His case has not yet produced any significant developments, and it is unlikely that his conviction will be overturned anytime soon in the absence of fresh evidence or modifications to the law. Although there is ongoing public discussion regarding the fairness of their trials and convictions, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey are currently serving their sentences. Dassey is still seeking parole after her most recent application was turned down in 2021. Kathleen Zellner, Stephen Avery's lawyer, filed a motion for post-conviction relief in August 2022, arguing that fresh evidence might connect Brendan's older brother Bobby Dassey to Teresa Halbach's murder. This was a big step because it raised the possibility that Bobby was complicit in the crime. Zellner argued that if there were other credible suspects, it might lead to Avery's relief, even though this had been conjectured previously. This theory, however, begs the question of whether two different groups were involved in Stephen's framing, or if Bobby was collaborating with the police. Zellner presented an affidavit from Thomas Brez, a truck driver, who stated that he saw Bobby Dassey driving Teresa's RAV4 with someone other than Stephen in the passenger seat a few days after Teresa passed away. Although this testimony provides additional context, it does not prove Bobby's involvement in the murder. Furthermore, Bobby is not directly connected to the crime, despite his computer history containing searches for violent pornography. Additionally, Zellner cited Bobby's alibi, which was offered by Scott Tadich, his mother's boyfriend, a man with a criminal record and a reputation for being irritable. Zellner implied that Tadich might have been complicit in the crime, either by lying or by taking part in it. However, in the absence of concrete proof, this remains conjectural. Zellner has also looked into Teresa's ex-boyfriend Ryan Hillegas's involvement. Ryan was heavily involved in Teresa's search and lacked an alibi. Zellner thought it was strange that Ryan had access to Teresa's voicemail and had not told the police about his previous relationship with her. There isn't any concrete proof that Ryan was involved in the murder, though, despite these suspicions. The court rejected Zellner's request for a hearing based on these other suspects, finding that there was not enough evidence or motivation to imply that Ryan or Bobby Dassey were involved in Avery's framing. In essence, the court decided that the defense had failed to show how these people could have committed the crime or fabricated evidence. Avery was transferred to the medium-security Fox Lake Correctional Institution in 2022. Although the case is still complex, Zellner intends to appeal to the Wisconsin State Court of Appeals. In addition to voicing concerns about Brendan Dassey's coerced confession, some experts doubt Avery's innocence because of his violent past and possible corruption. There are still unanswered questions regarding Teresa Halbach's death and the family's ongoing legal battles because the case has not been settled. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. What if the horrific murder of your loved one went unsolved for decades, leaving only questions and silence? Imagine the suffering, the annoyance, and the never-ending question. Who killed them? What made them deserving of death? Will there ever be justice? A young life full of beauty and promise was tragically cut short 41 years ago, making this nightmare a reality for one family. The memories, the sorrow, and the desire for answers persisted even after the investigation was unsuccessful. A vibrant, aspirational, and hospitable beauty school student, Laura Kempton had her entire life ahead of her. However, her future was brutally stolen on that fateful day in 1981. Her family was left in ruins, looking for hints that seemed to disappear. Are you prepared to learn more about Laura's tragic tale? A family left with unresolved questions, a life cut short, and a decades-long quest for justice. Will she at last receive the justice she is due? Together, let's discover Laura's true fate. Imagine a young lady who is eager to face the world and has a sparkle in her eyes. That was Laura, a 23-year-old with a dreamy heart and a passion for life. Her contagious laugh and radiant smile had a way of illuminating the space. Laura moved to Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 1980 from her small town. She needed a change because she was sick of the same old routine. The electric energy of the city offered her a new beginning and limitless opportunities. Laura experienced a wave of liberation, as though she could now be who she truly was. She was drawn to the energy and atmosphere of the city's clubs and music scene. Laura was a beauty school student by day and a social butterfly at night. She scooped sundaes for summer tourists at Karen's Ice Cream and worked at the quirky Market Street gift shop Macro Polo. She was only months away from realizing her dream of becoming a hairdresser. She was adamant about establishing herself in the city, and she succeeded in doing so. She developed her hairdressing skills during the day and used her passion for dancing to engage with the community at night. Despite the negative aspects of the city, Laura remained resilient. She had a purpose and a dream. Her passions and her work provided her with solace. Laura believed she was changing the world, fostering relationships, and improving the city with each Sunday she scooped and haircut she styled. Laura was confident that she would overcome any obstacles and become even more radiant. She enjoyed dancing, laughing, and being present. She was constantly surrounded by friends and admirers as she visited well-known locations like Riverside and the Ranger Club. She wouldn't have it any other way, and her social calendar was constantly full. Although Laura wasn't committed to a single partner, she was seeing a man named Charlie, who was a gifted saxophonist for a band that frequently played at Lucas, a well-liked restaurant in the neighborhood. As their relationship grew, Laura was eager to see where it would take them. Laura had a promising future with seemingly limitless opportunities. She was a young lady with an uncontrollable spirit and a hopeful heart. She had no idea, however, that her life was about to take a terrible turn that would destroy her community, friends, and family. It would turn out to be one of Portsmouth's most notorious crimes. It was a night Laura's friends would never forget. On September 28, 1981. Laura and her friends were dancing at the Riverside Club on a typical Saturday night. All around them, lights were flashing and music was pounding. Laura first saw JR there, a man whose smile could light up any space. Laura and JR were dancing together, grew closer to one another as each song was played. They returned to Laura's house at the end of the evening and continued to chat and laugh until the wee hours of the morning. JR gladly accepted Laura's invitation to stay over since she truly liked him. They stayed up late, telling each other stories and making each other laugh until they were unable to stay awake. Still grinning and making jokes, they stopped by Goldie's Deli for a quick breakfast the next day. However, Laura had to leave quickly for her job at Macro Polo, which she genuinely loved. She was buzzing with energy as she left the house that morning, and her friends noticed how excited she appeared. Laura was thinking about JR during her lunch break at Cafe Petronella. After work, she was eager to see him again. She couldn't help but smile when she thought about what they had. Laura and her friend Karen got together later that night and made the decision to visit Lucas, a bustling place on Hanover Street that is well known for its fantastic dancing and music. Together, they had a great time laughing until their sides ached and dancing as if no one else was around. Laura was only interested in having fun with Karen and enjoying the music, despite several guys trying to get her attention. At 1 a.m., Karen bid Laura farewell as the evening came to an end. On 20 Chapel Street steps, they had no idea that danger was close by. A curious 13-year-old boy named R.R. Seath lives across Sheath Street, left his bedroom to go to the restroom. As he walked through the living room, he noticed his mother sitting in the dark room, still awake. However, the living room window, which provided an excellent view of the first-floor apartment across the street, caught R.S.'s attention instead. The lovely young woman who had moved in that summer was someone he had become used to seeing. She was sitting with her back to the window on her couch. R.S. could make out the outline of something in her hand, possibly a cookie or cracker, and the soft curve of her shoulder blades. Not even R.S. One of the last times anyone would see Laura Kempton alive would be during this brief moment. It was an accidental glimpse, a brief moment in time of a life on the verge of tragedy. Everyone who knew Laura would be haunted by the tragedy that was about to unfold on the night that had started out so happily and with so much laughter. Hours later, on a clear Monday mid-morning, September 28, 1981, Officer Ron Grivois strolled through downtown Portsmouth. He was intimately familiar with these brick sidewalks. A young woman had failed to pay for her parking tickets at 20 Chapel Street, where he was headed. He saw that the front door was unlocked as he got closer to the structure. When he got to unit number 2, he discovered a door that was broken and had a missing panel. He peered in and saw a pair of legs bound at the ankles with a white cord and a jumbled heap of bedding. There was a terrible problem. With his thoughts racing, Grivois retreated. He looked around the stairwell and hallway, but he didn't see anything unusual. He radioed for backup after confirming that the scene was secure. Now his ordinary call had become a sinister revelation. Despite being blocked by crime scene tape, a crowd had gathered outside 20 Chapel Street by 9:25 a.m. on the 29th. Officer Grivois' startling discovery was widely publicized. William Mortimer, the lead investigator and a seasoned detective with years of Portsmouth Police Department experience, was already on the scene. He absorbed the unsettling scene in front of him. Nearly all of Laura's body was concealed by a mattress, box springs, and a heap of bedding. From the knees down, only her legs were visible, restrained by a white cord from an electric blanket. Beneath her, a big blood stain had seeped into the rug. Mortimer saw evidence of a bloody struggle as he scanned the room. The walls were splattered with blood, Laura's possessions were all over the place, and drawers and closets were looted. Mortimer realized he had a difficult case ahead of him. After witnessing the chaotic and gory scene, Mortimer's team cautiously raised the mattress and blankets as he continued to look around, revealing a scene that chilled his blood. With a green pillowcase covering her face and a gray telephone cord suffocating her neck, Laura lay bare, her body bruised and battered. Mortimer gently took off the pillowcase and his heart fell. Laura's features were hardly distinguishable due to the tangle of purple bruises and swelling on her face. She had been brutally beaten, with blows so severe they almost crushed her skull, as the medical examiner would later confirm. However, that wasn't all. A bottle of wine was lying next to her dead body, its innocence seeming to mock Mortimer. Then, in sharp contrast to Laura's non-smoking habits, there was the cigarette butt haphazardly left on the floor. Mortimer appeared to be taunted with questions and clues by the killer's presence. Who was this individual? Why had they acted with such unimaginable violence? This was not the end of it. Many questions were hanging around the window. By whom was Laura killed? Who was present when she passed away? What afflicted her prior to her demise? Who was going to give Laura justice? Mortimer and his team found a vital piece of evidence in the hallway after Laura's body was moved to a gurney, a tiny black metal hook that had been ripped from the mailbox. The murderer had repurposed this commonplace item, which was used to hang keys, to obtain entry. Mortimer saw that the criminal had pried out the molding with the hook, which made it possible for them to reach inside and open the door. Investigators conducted a comprehensive search and gathered hundreds of possible pieces of evidence, such as 2 cords, a cigarette butt, a pillowcase that covered Laura's head and neck, and a glass wine bottle that was discovered on the floor next to her body. They painstakingly scanned the exterior and interior of the apartment for palm prints and fingerprints, and found multiple matches, particularly on the door and a phone within the apartment. These discoveries might contain important hints that help solve the mystery of Laura's untimely death. Laura's autopsy was performed later that afternoon by medical examiner Dr. Dennis Carlson. His findings, severe head trauma and evidence of sexual assault, confirmed the terrible severity of her injuries. Skin scrapings from Laura's upper left thigh, vaginal swabs, and swabs from the telephone cord around her neck were among the crucial pieces of evidence that Dr. Carlson gathered. Mortimer was determined to put the pieces together and determine who was responsible for her death, even though the investigation had only just begun. In order to question Laura's friends, family, co-workers, and classmates, basically anybody who might have had contact with her in the days leading up to her death, he assembled a team of detectives and police officers. These interviews painted a picture of Laura as a happy, gregarious young lady with a vibrant social life. It was hard to think anyone would want to hurt her. Speaking with JR was of special interest to the police because of his recent relationship with Laura. Before leaving for breakfast on Sunday, September 27, he affirmed that they had sex early in the morning and again later that day. Even though he took a shower afterwards, JR admitted that samples taken from Laura's body may include his semen. He gave some interesting information about Laura's habits and mentioned that she had no visible cuts or bruises from their time together. First of all, Laura always made sure to lock the door of her apartment, even when they left for a quick snack at around 3 in the morning. The Sunday, she questioned JR to make sure the front door was locked. Secondly, JR noticed that as they got ready to leave in the morning, Laura put a wad of cash into a plain envelope on her kitchen table. Although she didn't say so, the money might have been for rent or a utility bill. Later, it was found that the envelope and its contents were missing, most likely taken by the criminal. Additional information about what happened after Karen left Laura early on Monday morning was given by her neighbors. RS, and at around 1:30 a.m., his mother, who lived across the street, noticed Laura in her living room. When Daniel, a 40-year-old resident of Laura's building, got home about 30 minutes later, he saw that the ground floor hallway light was out. He suspected someone was fixing Laura's door, possibly following a break-in, after noticing a missing wooden panel and hearing sounds coming from inside her apartment. Later, it was discovered that the light bulb in the hallway had most likely been purposefully loosened. If Daniel's timing was correct, Laura's killer was most likely the source of the sounds he heard. Vital samples were taken from Laura's body by Dr. Carlson, including skin scrapings from her upper thigh and vaginal swabs and smears. The New Hampshire State Forensic Lab received these for examination. The lab was able to identify blood types from the samples even though DNA testing was not yet available 4 years before its potential in criminal investigations was realized. According to the results, Laura's blood type A was found on the wine bottle, suggesting that it was probably used in the crime. Additionally, type A blood was discovered on the pillowcase and door molding. Sperm were found in the skin scrapings and vaginal smears, and there were traces of seminal fluid in the telephone cord. 42 years later, these discoveries would be essential to the case's resolution. In a terrifying coincidence, Tammy Little, a fellow Portsmouth Beauty School student, was discovered murdered in her apartment a few months later on October 19, 1982, with comparable injuries. Fears of a serial killer were sparked by the widespread suspicion that the two crimes were connected. Some similarities existed between the two cases. Both victims lived alone in ground-floor apartments, were in their early 20s, and were unmarried. About a mile separated the two addresses. A few months prior to their deaths, both women had just moved in. Both frequented the same local bars and belonged to the same social circles. Both were killed early in the morning following a night out with friends in the fall. They had both sustained severe head injuries. Both suffered deformities to their faces. They both went to Portsmouth Beauty School. Both had modeled for photographers in the area. Detective Mortimer was careful to avoid making hasty connections between the cases in the absence of strong evidence. Despite these connections, the murders of Tammy Little and Laura Kempton were still unsolved. As of September 25, 1985, investigators were unable to obtain sufficient evidence to make an arrest, despite suspicions about men who were acquaintances or had been spotted with the victims. Both cases are still being investigated, Portsmouth Police Captain George Crook assured the public. The frustration of having a top suspect, but not enough proof to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, was acknowledged by Assistant Attorney General Brian Tucker. Tucker stressed that before moving forward, investigators need to have faith in their case. It's ironic that in 1985, Alec Jeffreys, a trailblazing scientist, solved a double murder in England using genetic fingerprinting, but it would be more than 10 years before this technology was taken into account in U.S. investigations. The development of cases like Kempton's and Little's was hampered by the fact that New Hampshire wouldn't set up its own DNA testing facility until 2002. Detectives sent 2 DNA samples from Laura's case to Cellmark Diagnostics in Maryland in 2000 for analysis. The telephone wire on her neck and the area of her thighs were the sites of the samples. They obtained a partial male DNA profile from the thigh sample, despite their inability to create a DNA profile from the wire. The Portsmouth police submitted more evidence to the Maine State Crime Lab for analysis in 2002, 2 years later. From the vaginal swab, forensic analyst Kathy McMillan created 2 DNA profiles, one for Laura and another for an unidentified man. A partial male profile that matched the vaginal swab was discovered on the cigarette butt that was discovered close to Laura's body. Interestingly, this profile also matched the partial profile from the previously acquired thigh scrapings. When J.R. Laura's last known sexual partner was tested and turned out to not match the DNA evidence, the investigation took an unexpected turn. In actuality, even though they had previously had sex, his DNA was completely absent from her body. As a result, over the course of the following 10 years, investigators eliminated hundreds of people of interest and continued to gather comparison DNA samples. An investigation into the use of genetic genealogy to solve cold cases, such as Laura Kempton's, was initiated in September 2021 by the Attorney General's Office, New Hampshire State Crime Lab, and Portsmouth Police. To reanalyze the vaginal swab samples, they contacted Identifinders International. The lead investigator learned that the DNA profile of the unidentified male had been successfully acquired and matched to a close relative in the GED Match database in May 2022, 8 months later. The unidentified male was soon recognized by genetic genealogist Linda Doyle as the child of 2 particular people who had only one biological child. The lead detective took a blood card from the autopsy, but the child had died almost 20 years earlier, and sent it to the Maine State Crime Lab for comparison. Laura's vaginal swab and the DNA on the blood card matched exactly, proving that Ronnie James Lee was the murderer. Authorities finally had a name to link to the anonymous suspect after more than 42 years. On January 16, 1960, Ronnie James Lee was born in Fort Myers. Charlie James Lee and Janie Mae are listed as his parents in his obituary, but it's unclear if they were both his biological parents. Of Charlie and Janie Mae's 6 children, Ronnie was the third. When he was growing up, his parents got divorced. Although not much is known about Ronnie's early years, he joined the Army as a teenager in the late 1970s and remained there until May 15, 1981. At that time, he and his mother resided on Rock Hill Avenue in Portsmouth's North End, only a short 8-minute drive or 40-minute walk from Laura Kempton's residence in Old Harbor. Although Ronnie was employed by MBI Security, he began working as a security guard for the Liberty Mutual building in Portsmouth in June 2001. Laura moved into her Chapel Street apartment at the same time. Ronnie killed Laura when he broke into her apartment in September 2001, but he escaped being apprehended by police. When Ronnie was arrested for attempted burglary in November 1982, his interactions with the Portsmouth Police Department took on a significant role. He went on a burglary rampage the next summer, breaking into 4 residences and 1 city business. Similar to his break-in at Laura's apartment, one of these burglaries involved smashing a window pane and opening it from the inside. Ronnie was found guilty of sexual assault and burglary in Keene, New Hampshire in 1987-3. Around 30:30 a.m., a young woman who was at home during the robbery woke up to discover someone caressing her. Ronnie was standing over her when she opened her eyes. Her roommate was awakened by her scream, and Ronnie ran away with jewelry and cash that had been stolen. After his arrest, he received a 3-year prison sentence that ran from 1987 to 1990. In 2005, Ronnie passed away at the age of 45 from a cocaine overdose. He left behind a son, multiple step-siblings, and a criminal legacy that was kept under wraps for almost 20 years after his passing. The murder of Laura Kempton in 1981 has finally been solved after decades of investigation. To make the announcement, law enforcement officials convened at the State Police Communications Center in Concord on a bright afternoon in late July. Ronnie James Lee was identified as Laura's murderer by New Hampshire Attorney General John Formella. Lee, who would have been 63 today, would have been charged with robbery, battery, aggravated sexual assault, and first-degree murder. Unfortunately, Lee had already died, so justice was served too late. The investigation continued despite the case going cold thanks to detectives' hard work and advances in forensic science. Before his death in 2019, Police Commissioner William Mortimer, the case's first lead detective, had stated that he was confident the case could be solved. At last, his trust in forensic science and his team has been validated. The family of Laura Kempton expressed gratitude to the police for their diligent efforts in resolving the case. They valued the investigators' commitment and perseverance in ensuring Laura and her family members received justice. Laura's family and loved ones could now finally rest easy, knowing that Ronnie James Lee was found guilty of her murder. Justice was served, but it took a while. This case demonstrated the importance of perseverance in pursuing justice and the truth, no matter how long it takes. In the meantime, the evidence from Tammy Little's 1982 murder is still intact and is awaiting the identification of a suspect through scientific and genealogical advancements. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When 16-year-old Carol Sue Klaber was discovered strangled to death on June 5, 1976, her family and the entire northern Kentucky community were left in shock and desperation. The case remained unresolved for decades, with no leads or suspects until the advent of new technology, which was essential in resolving this mystery. How did the murderer escape punishment for so long, and who might have done this to Carol? We'll explore the enigmatic case of Carol Sue Klaber today. This 46-year-old cold case was ultimately resolved in 2022. Let's get straight to the heart of this conundrum then. The U.S. state of Kentucky contains the county of Boone. Daniel Boone, a pioneer, was honored with the county's name when it was established in 1798. The Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport, a significant hub for the area, is located in this county, which is the fourth most populated in Kentucky. Burlington, the county seat, is renowned for its outdoor leisure spaces, historic sites, and robust agricultural sector. A terrible murder occurred here in Boone in 1976. On November 28, 1959, a new life was born in the beautiful state of Kentucky, tucked away among majestic hills and rushing brooks. Carol Sue Klaber was named by her parents, Daniel Henry Klaber and Betty Jane Meek Reneker, who were beaming with happiness as they held their darling daughter in their arms. Thomas Klaber, her older brother, watched in awe and was excited to have his new sister join the family. Carol was a very funny person. She had a great deal of empathy for those in need and was incredibly modest for a teenager. When she was 16, she volunteered at St. Charles Nursing Home. In her younger years, Carol had also been a Girl Scout and a Brownie. Peachy was always interested in music and loved to cook, sew, and play records. She also began taking piano lessons when she was 5 years old. Carol's piano teacher, Hattie Schatzman, had selected her to represent her students at the Ohio Music Teacher Association, and she was also learning violin. Carol performed at the Taft Museum twice. Her classmates were drawn to her gregarious and compassionate nature, and her love of music and innate talent made her a favorite member of the Dixie Heights High School string group. The sun was shining brightly over the small town of Union, Kentucky on June 5, 1976, as the locals went about their daily lives as usual. Reputable Walton dentist, Dr. Gaines Huey, got out of bed early to go to work, eager to take care of his customers' dental needs. He saw something unusual along the edge of the road while he was traveling down Chambers Road. Curiosity prompted him to stop and approach the item. Only as he approached did he comprehend what he had discovered: a body resting strangely motionless along a culvert that acted as a rainwater drain pipe. He dialed the Kentucky State Police while in astonishment and with shaking hands. That day, Trooper Jan Wuchner just so happened to be on duty. To solve the riddle of the dead person by the side of the road, Wuchner, an experienced investigator who had previously worked for the Boone County Sheriff's Department, hurried to the scene. At approximately 7:15 a.m. Walton State Police Department detectives arrived at the crime scene. With keen attention to detail, they scanned the area. The detectives saw the unmistakable traces of a struggle as they started their investigation: trampled grass, broken twigs, and indications of a violent altercation. The victim's body lay a few feet away, her wounds indicating that she had been attacked and strangled. The detectives realized with increasing horror that this was a planned and premeditated murder rather than an incident of violence. In their pursuit of justice, the investigators were committed to doing everything they could. However, they searched the crime scene but were unable to locate any tangible evidence. They chose to go to the victim's body for answers because they were frustrated by the loss. For a comprehensive examination, her body was taken to the county medical examiner's laboratory. In a meticulous autopsy, the medical examiner looked for hints in every part of the victim's body. Every cut, bruise, and wound was meticulously recorded, and every hint was meticulously examined. The autopsy's findings exposed the harsh reality of her demise. It appeared from the evidence that she had been severely beaten. The marks of a tire iron used relentlessly were visible on her torso. The examiner saw the severe cuts on her scalp, which were probably from a harsh object, and the once beautiful face was now warped by swelling and bruises. Her unfortunate and premature death resulted from irreversible damage caused by the crushing blow to her head. There were also clear indications of severe bodily trauma and abuse. Asphyxia brought on by hand strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head was finally identified as the cause of death, which was a devastating moment for everyone concerned. The investigation became even more urgent after such savagery was discovered. They identified some traces of alien DNA on the victim's clothing while examining the evidence that was recovered from the scene. They tried their hardest, but they couldn't find anyone who had it at the moment. They meticulously preserved the evidence in the hopes that future technological developments would result in a breakthrough in the case. Detectives found one of the family members, the victim's brother. After putting in countless hours of work, he mustered the bravery to come and identify the body using the DNA that had been taken from it. Upon seeing the lifeless and motionless body of his beloved sister, Carol Sue Klaber, on the chilly metal table, 23-year-old Thomas Klaber entered the morgue with heavy footsteps. His face was wet with tears. He knew that he would never again see her brilliant smile or hear her contagious laugh, and the pain in his heart was unbearable. As the investigation went on, the detectives made sure to look everything. They searched the neighborhood, knocking on doors, talking to locals, and obtaining any information that would shed light on the terrible event. In order to learn more about Carol Sue Klaber's life and potential adversaries, they also conducted extensive research into her past, speaking with her friends and family. Investigators discovered that for the Klaber family, June 4, 1976 was just another day. With a smile on her face and the wind in her hair, 16-year-old Carol Sue Klaber got on her bike and cycled about town. She spoke with friends, greeted the locals, and enjoyed the pleasant summer day. She intended to meet a friend at Zeno's Hyde Park restaurant later that night. She left her house at 5:30 p.m., but as the sun started to drop, Klaber was driven home by a young man in a sleek Chevrolet Monte Carlo. One of the neighbors claims to have seen the young man, who was slender and towering at an amazing 6 feet tall with sandy blonde hair. After a brief conversation, Carol left the man waiting impatiently outside the house and walked inside. Carol came out of the home a few minutes later, climbed into the car, and drove off with the man. It was Carol's final appearance on Earth. The murder case of Carol Sue Klaber remains unresolved, despite police best efforts to locate the owners of the suspected cars in the town. The leads had dried up, and the case had reached a brick wall, leaving investigators scratching their heads. The case eventually became cold, and remained that way for more than 40 years. A ray of hope appeared in the Carol Sue Klaber murder inquiry after years of gloom. Coy Cox and Tim Adams, two cold case detectives from the Boone County Sheriff's Office, revitalized the case in 2017. They teamed up with Jerry Keith, the original detective on the case, who had continued to hold the case near and dear to his heart after retiring, in their unwavering quest for justice and the truth for Carol Sue Klaber. The three of them put in endless hours using contemporary technology in order to cobble together a fresh interpretation of the catastrophe that had baffled them for years. They painstakingly went over the old evidence, speaking with witnesses and sorting through leads. They started their inquiry by looking into the two main suspects Keith had previously named. The initial suspect was a man with a history of auto theft whose car looked eerily similar to the one in which Carol was last seen. This individual was the target of the detectives, who scrutinized him closely in an attempt to get any useful information. The man denied any involvement in Carol's murder, even though he was a suspect in the case. He confided in the detectives about his previous transgressions, but he maintained his innocence in Carol's death. Thus, the police took his DNA and compared it to the DNA recovered from the victim's clothing in 1976. Following the anxious wait for the findings of the DNA tests, Cox and Adams finally called the man in December 2018. Since his DNA test was negative, he was no longer considered a suspect in Carol's murder. The realization that he could finally breathe easily and start over made the world feel lighter. Cox and Adams then returned their focus to their unrelenting hunt for the murderer. They had to start over because the leads on their first suspect had dried up. However, in 2020, they made the decision to pursue their second suspect, who had been found guilty of a violent sexual assault in the same neighborhood just 2 years prior to Carol's 1978 murder. He was now 77 years old and went as Michael Dean Tate. In order to strengthen their case against Michael Dean Tate, Cox and Adams contacted the victim of the 1978 assault in 2020 to get her version of what happened. Her name would not be revealed, but she remembered the night clearly, when she was viciously attacked in her own garage at around 2 in the morning on October 1, 1978. She remembered the eerie darkness of the Park Hills night. The victim remembered how, despite her best efforts to fight and scream, her attacker appeared to take a sadistic pleasure in causing her pain. But the attacker left her injured and broken alive after 2 hours of suffering. The emotional and physical wounds that Tate had inflicted on her on that fateful and gloomy night took years to heal. When Tate's involvement in the 1978 case was revealed, Cox and Adams were unable to rule out the possibility that he was responsible for Carol's death. Tate was a prime suspect in the case, since he frequently traveled to the region for work in the 1000, 970S, and 1980S, which coincided with Carol's murder. Tate, however, insisted on his innocence and denied any role in Carol's death, despite the growing evidence against him. It had been the investigators' hope that they would eventually find the offender. Their hopes were quickly crushed, though, as the DNA study did not match Tate's, and court records showed that Tate had been in Cincinnati in 1976, precluding him from committing the crime. The investigators questioned whether they would ever solve this long-standing enigma. The case remained mysterious for almost 50 years, as it once again fell into obscurity. However, the Boone County Sheriff's Office contacted the Othram Lab experts on September 17, 2022. The Season of Justice offered financing for the Othram team to work on this case because of their proficiency in genetic genealogy. A DNA sample taken from the crime scene in 1976 was delivered to Othram Labs by the Kentucky State Police Central Forensic Center. Othram's highly qualified experts were able to create a comprehensive DNA profile for the elusive suspect by using sophisticated forensic-grade genome sequencing. They were able to uncover important genetic data that had been concealed for decades, thanks to their state-of-the-art technique. Based on the thorough DNA profile they had created, the genealogy specialists at Othram Labs produced investigation leads using forensic genetic genealogy. After receiving the DNA samples on November 25, 2022, Othram Labs produced an answer in less than 2 months, which was a surprising turn of events. They found a link to a man called Thomas W. Dunaway, who died in 1990 at the age of 33, by examining the genetic evidence left by the murderer. The fact that Dunaway had a son who had never known his father was disclosed. In order to get DNA samples for comparison, the detectives traveled to meet with Thomas Dunaway's son, whose name was kept secret. The answer to the conundrum that had long eluded law enforcement would lie in the outcomes of these vital laboratory tests. They meticulously gathered the required samples with an unwavering dedication to justice and a will to find the truth. On December 12, 2022, the protracted investigation into the matter was finally concluded. After nearly 46 years, Carol Sue Klaber and her family had finally received justice, because to the investigators' unrelenting commitment and the deployment of cutting-edge technology, the process was difficult, but the perseverance of those involved paid off, leading to a breakthrough that would provide closure to everyone impacted by the tragic events of 1976, when Dunaway's son's DNA partially matched the DNA traces they had discovered on Carol's body all those many years ago. The Carol Sue Klaber murder case was never abandoned by the police. Born on May 20, 1957, and only 19 years old at the time, Thomas W. Dunaway remained undiscovered for many years. They discovered important details about Dunaway's past and the horrible things he had done as a result of their persistence. He resided close to Duval Park, where Carol was last spotted with a man who resembled him, the police found out. More incriminating information against Dunaway surfaced as they dug deeper. Dunaway was more than a single offender. He had been committing crimes for 6 months, and the cars he used to flee each crime scene left a trail of evidence. Carol Sue Klaber died, but the nightmare didn't end there. 6 months later, in December 1976, he was convicted of another murder. The 19-year-old Ronald Townsend was discovered dead and covered in bullet wounds on the ground. The town was grieved by the loss, but when Thomas Dunaway, the murderer of Townsend, was apprehended and confessed to his crimes, their spirits were raised. Dunaway was given a life sentence, but regrettably, he was only imprisoned for 7.5 years before being freed in 1984. It is still unclear if justice was done, or if it was only a passing illusion. The disturbing pattern of violence and gloom that pervaded Dunaway's life was discovered by Detective Coy Cox. Even though Carol's murder may not have been solved, the police were able to reveal the full scope of Dunaway's lethal and frightening reign of terror. There was an unsettling similarity between Ronald Townsend's murder and Carol Sue Klaber's murder. As though the murderer wished to make a statement, both bodies were left in plain sight, only a few inches from the road. As the inquiry went forward, investigators discovered a concerning detail regarding Dunaway. He was not in the Army on leave at the time of Townsend's death. Just 9 days after Carol's passing, Dunaway joined the military and was assigned to Fort Knox before being moved to Fort Carson in Colorado. Even after joining the military, Thomas Dunaway was unable to avoid problems. Although Dunaway's love of vehicles was unrivaled, it ultimately proved to be his undoing. He exchanged his beloved 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo for a striking orange Chevrolet Vega, since he had a strong eye for a good price. But he had no idea that detectives looking into the murder of Ronald Townsend would be drawn to this ostentatious vehicle. The detectives issued an all-points bulletin for Dunaway and his orange Vega as they pursued him furiously. When Dunaway was arrested in South Carolina on suspicion of Townsend's murder and unlawful firearm possession on a gloomy Christmas Eve in 1976, the game of cat and mouse came to an end. The connection between Carol Sue Klaber and Thomas Dunaway left investigators baffled as they dug deeper into the mysterious murder case. It was unknown how they linked later in life, even though they might have met while still in the Erlanger-Ellesmere Schools District. But in the middle of the chaos, Detective Coy Cox gave a crucial hint that might help solve the case. Carol had a particular place in her heart for Val Park, this green haven, and it's likely that her love of the park brought her and Dunaway together by happenstance. Perhaps she met him because she was known to be gregarious. Maybe they happened to cross paths at the park, where they laughed and told stories to each other in a serene environment. Given that Dunaway lived a short distance from the location where Carol used to ride her bike, there is no doubt that the park plays a significant role in their relationship. There was a mixture of relief and sadness when Thomas Dunaway was identified as the murderer of Carol Sue Klaber. Although the authorities considered the case closed, the family was left feeling torn after learning that Dunaway had died on December 28, 1990, at the young age of 33. The Klaber family still feels that justice is unattainable, even after learning the truth. As Thomas Klaber moaned, he wished he had the opportunity to speak with Dunaway before to his tragic passing, and wondered what justice meant now. Her brother has been haunted by the memories of Carol's murder. He has been carrying that burden for nearly 50 years. He was never completely able to get rid of the worry that his family would experience another tragedy. He calls his 28-year-old son Daniel late at night to check on Cince. He is constantly concerned about his safety. In the same way that he lost his sister, he fears losing everyone else he cares about. He is reminded of the value of each moment and the significance of cherishing people we love by this terror, which holds him fast like a vice. The thought of disrupting his sister's last resting place was intolerable to Thomas Kleber. His heart ached at the idea of upsetting her sound sleep in order to find her killer. Fortunately, investigators discovered an alternative. They were able to exhume Carol Sue's killer's body rather than her remains. Thomas has found some small comfort in the knowledge that his sister's grave has not been disturbed, even though it may not be the justice he had hoped for. For Thomas, the knowledge that his sister can now finally rest in peace and the little triumphs are what matter. Detective Cox's recent court order to exhume Dunaway's body for DNA testing demonstrates his unwavering commitment to pursuing justice. Entering the DNA into CODIS might mark the start of a new chapter in the fight for justice, and Cox is prepared to face any obstacles that may come up. Carol Sue Kleber's killer cannot be convicted in a court of law, but justice was ultimately served for her after nearly 50 years. Lewis Kelly, the Commonwealth Attorney for Boone County, has declared the matter concluded. Detective Cox revealed the bittersweet experience of telling Carol's brother that the culprit had been found after all these years, and the news made him cry. The closure that comes with knowing the truth provides a tiny comfort in the face of such a tragedy, even though the past cannot be changed. By identifying the killer, Thomas W. Dunaway, Detective Coy Cox and his team were able to finally solve the 46-year-old murder mystery of Carol Sue Kleber. This case demonstrates how committed law enforcement is to seeking justice for victims and their families, regardless of the length of time required. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.